I was alone. No voices, no footsteps. My ears rang from the sudden silence. I shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. I circled around the house. Nothing. I felt a cold sweat on my neck. My shirt clung to my back. I rushed inside and locked everything again. The next morning, I checked for damage on the siding. There were no marks, no dents, nothing that explained the banging. I tried to watch the camera footage, but the system had cut out at 2:47 a.m. Around the time I heard that noise. There was just a blank spot in the recordings, then it resumed at 3:10 a.m. The empty timeline gave me chills. I kept living like that for a few more weeks. Every night brought new bumps, creaks, and sudden door slams. Every morning I found no sign of forced entry. The cameras turned off at random intervals. My frustration grew. I felt exhausted during the day. I could barely focus on simple tasks. My back ached from the constant tension in my muscles. Sometimes my hands trembled when I tried to drink coffee. I avoided going anywhere near that clearing unless it was broad daylight. I even put up extra floodlights facing that patch of dirt. It didn't help. The presence I felt never went away. It was always there, on the edges of my senses. One evening, I decided I had to do something about this. I took the box and all its contents, carried it back out to the clearing, and buried it in the same spot where I found it. I patted the dirt down, feeling a strange relief as I covered the hole. My nerves were on edge, and my mouth tasted like metal. I felt like I was doing the only thing that might bring me peace. When I finished, I walked away quickly, not looking back. That night I still heard noises, but they felt more distant. The banging didn't happen. The footsteps in the hallway were faint, like an echo. The cameras only turned off once. I still felt uneasy, but there was a slight difference in the air. Over the next few days, the events slowed down. The footsteps came less often. The doors mostly stayed silent. I still sensed something watching me near the clearing, but it felt less intense. I'm still renting this place. I haven't decided whether to stay long term. I avoid that clearing most of the time, and I don't mess with whatever's buried out there. Sometimes at night I still hear a soft creak on the floorboards or a tap on the window. My security cameras still glitch every now and then, but I do my best to ignore it. I lock my doors, keep the lights on, and try to sleep. The feeling of being watched hasn't gone away entirely, but it's weaker now. I don't have an explanation for any of this. All I know is that something out here doesn't want to be disturbed. I learned my lesson. I keep my distance, and I let it stay buried. I still remember the day my grandfather handed me that old music box. He told me it had been in our family for decades. At first, I didn't pay much attention to his serious expression. I just accepted the small wooden box and placed it on a shelf in my living room. I had plenty of other things on my mind, and a vintage trinket didn't seem important. But everything changed the night I heard its melody echo through my apartment without any logical explanation. That single event stirred something inside me, an uneasy tension that I still can't shake. I live in a modest two-bedroom place on the outskirts of town. It's usually quiet around here. At night, I hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, and sometimes the water pipes clanking. I'm used to those sounds. They're part of my routine. I relax on the couch, watch some shows, and maybe doze off after a long day. But one night around 2 in the morning, I shot awake because I heard music. My heart thumped as I tried to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't my phone. It wasn't the TV. It was a light, tinkling tune drifting from the direction of my bookshelf. I got up, flipped on a lamp, and walked toward the sound. I saw the music box, that little wooden cube with metal hinges, sitting there with its lid shut. But the sound kept coming. My stomach felt tight, and I hesitated before picking it up. The noise was faint, like a small music box melody. I tried opening the lid. The inside was dark and still. There was a small, winding key on the side, but it wasn't moving. I put my ear close. The melody was definitely coming from inside, yet there was no sign of a mechanism in motion. My hands trembled as I tilted the box. I expected to see a hidden battery or something that might explain the sound. The box looked empty. The interior was just worn velvet, and there was no place for a battery to fit. I rubbed the back of my neck and let out a shaky breath. Then, as suddenly as it began, the music faded and stopped. Everything went silent again. I stood there in my living room with that wooden box in my hands. My pulse pounded in my ears and a bead of sweat ran down my temple. The next morning, I tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe there was a glitch in the box's old mechanism. I even considered that it might have some leftover wind from years ago. I told myself it made sense. Sometimes old devices can hold tension in their springs for a while. The thought calmed me for a bit, so I set the box back on the shelf. I went about my day, working from home, cooking, cleaning. The memory of that eerie tune lingered, but I tried to push it out of my mind. Later that week, I invited a friend over. His name's Marcus. We had some pizza and a few beers in the living room. At some point, I glanced at the bookshelf and saw the music box. I told Marcus about the weird episode. He gave me a crooked grin and walked over to pick it up. He turned the key, but it was stiff and wouldn't budge. He flicked the lid open and examined the insides. He looked a bit confused because there was no obvious mechanism, just a bit of scratched metal under the velvet lining. He shrugged and handed it back to me. "Are you sure you weren't half asleep?" he asked. I felt a little defensive, but I also understood his skepticism. It sounded far-fetched. I said it might have been a dream, but deep down, I remembered how real it felt. I could still recall the exact tune. Marcus just laughed it off, and we changed the subject. I pushed the box aside and continued our conversation about sports and work. By the end of the night, I had almost convinced myself it was all in my head. But after Marcus left, I found myself staring at that box. I couldn't help it. My chest felt tight and my scalp tingled as I approached it. I lifted it, gave a tiny shake, and heard nothing. No rattle, no loose parts. Just the weight of old wood and metal. I tried turning the key again, but it was stuck as always. I set it down and went to bed, feeling that uneasy weight in my stomach. A few nights later, I was lying on my couch, trying to fall asleep in front of the TV. The house was dark except for the glow of the screen. My eyes were drifting shut when I heard that melody again. My muscles tensed, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I snapped upright and muted the TV. The tune was clearer than before. Soft, tinny notes repeating the same short sequence. I tried to ignore the chill running up my spine. I walked slowly to the bookshelf, clenching my jaw. The box was closed. The key hadn't moved. Yet, the music played. I grabbed my phone from my pocket to record it. I tapped the record button and my hand shook a bit as I held the phone near the box. My breathing grew shallow, and my heart pounded. The melody looped for maybe 10 seconds before it died out again. I stood there in silence, listening to the sound of my own heavy breathing. After that, I tried to make sense of it. I played back the recording. Sure enough, there it was. Faint music on the audio. I felt a jolt of relief, at least because I wasn't losing my mind. I had proof. But having proof also scared me because it meant there was something I couldn't explain. I paced the living room, arms crossed, eyes flicking back to the bookshelf. I texted Marcus the audio file, but he didn't respond right away. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning in bed, half afraid I'd hear that melody again in the dark. Over the next few days, I tried different experiments. I shook the box, opened it, inspected every inch with a flashlight. I even pried out the velvet lining, searching for hidden wiring or electronics. I found nothing but the bare interior. The wood was chipped in places, and there was a small chunk of metal in the bottom that looked like part of an old gear. No power supply, no speaker, no reason it should emit any noise. Whenever I messed with it during the day, it stayed silent. But at night, specifically in the early hours, it occasionally played by itself. The unpredictability made me jittery. Every little noise in the apartment made me jump. I started leaving all the lights on. I even carried the box to my bedroom a few times. just to keep an eye on it. That didn't help. In fact, one night around 3 in the morning, I was lying in bed, looking at the box on my bedside table. My eyes were heavy, but I was too restless to sleep. Then that familiar tune started up. A shiver ran down my arms, and I sat up so fast I nearly knocked the lamp over. The notes were crisp and slightly distorted, like they were coming from something broken yet determined to function. I stared at the box, waiting to see if the lid would pop open. It didn't move. It just played. After about 15 seconds, it stopped. In those moments, I felt disconnected from my usual calm. I felt a pit in my stomach and a tightness in my chest. My breathing was shallow and my fingertips tingled from adrenaline. I didn't know what the box wanted me to do. Smashing it crossed my mind. I actually considered grabbing a hammer from the closet and destroying it right then and there. But something stopped me. Maybe it was a sense of loyalty to my grandfather, maybe it was just fear. I decided to set it on the floor, push it under the bed, and ignore it for the rest of the night. The next day, I woke up drenched in sweat. My throat was dry and my head pounded. I checked under the bed, half expecting the box to be gone or moved. It was right where I left it. I slid it out, pressed my ear against it, and heard nothing. I placed it in a storage bin in my closet. Then I slammed the closet door and left it there. I spent most of the day outside running errands and visiting a local coffee shop just to be around other people. After a few nights of silence, I started to feel better. The tension in my shoulders eased. I slept better. No random music woke me up. I began to convince myself that I had fixed the problem by isolating the box. But one night, around midnight, I heard a muffled tune from behind the closet door. My eyes flew open, and every muscle in my body tensed. The closet was just a few steps from my bed. I felt my face get hot and my stomach twisted. My heart hammered against my ribs. The tune was slightly muted by the closet door, but I recognized it right away. That same sequence of notes over and over again. I jumped out of bed, flicked on the overhead light, and yanked the closet door open. The sound grew clearer. I grabbed the storage bin and opened it. The music pulsed from the box like it had a life of its own. My breaths were shallow, and my hands shook. I lifted the box, marched to the living room, and set it on the kitchen counter. The melody kept going, steady and mechanical, even though the box's key was motionless. My jaw clenched, and I felt sweat trickle down my back. I paced around the kitchen, listening to the tune until it stopped. My stomach churned. I thought about getting rid of it entirely, maybe tossing it in a dumpster far from home. But something made me hesitate. My grandfather gave me that box. I had a hard time just throwing it away. I decided to keep it, but I didn't want it in the apartment anymore. I picked up the phone and called Marcus. It was late, but I knew he stayed up most nights playing video games, so I took a chance. He answered with a tired voice. I told him I needed a favor. The next day I drove to Marcus's place. I packed the music box in a small cardboard box and taped it shut. When I handed it to him, he looked confused. I asked if he could store it in his garage for a while. I didn't explain much, just said I couldn't keep it around. He shrugged and said he'd stash it in a corner. I drove away feeling a mixture of relief and worry. Part of me was glad to be rid of the box, but a sliver of anxiety gnawed at my mind. I didn't know if it would follow me somehow or if I'd feel compelled to get it back. For a solid week, I slept peacefully. No strange noises, no music. The tension in my chest lifted. I went to work each day, came home, watched TV, and went to bed without any drama. My appetite improved, and I laughed more easily. I felt like I had reclaimed my life. But a small part of me wondered if Marcus had heard anything. He hadn't mentioned it, and I didn't bring it up. Then one evening, Marcus called me out of the blue. I heard the concern in his voice. He said he was in his garage, and he swore he heard a weird metallic jingle. My stomach sank. I asked him to check the cardboard box. He told me it was sealed, but he could still hear a faint melody inside. My mouth went dry, and my grip tightened on the phone. He sounded uneasy, like he didn't want to open it. I said maybe he should just keep it in there. He let out a nervous laugh, but I could tell he wasn't amused. He agreed to leave it sealed for now. Later that night, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the empty space on my shelf where the music box used to sit. My leg bounced with nervous energy. I tried not to think about it, but I couldn't help imagining that delicate little tune drifting through Marcus's garage. I pictured him standing there in the dark, hearing something that shouldn't be possible. My palms grew sweaty, and a dull ache throbbed behind my eyes. I still haven't fully decided what to do. Part of me wants to tell Marcus to bring it back so I can destroy it for good. Another part of me can't stand the idea of smashing something my grandfather handed down. I feel torn. The melody is stuck in my head most nights. Sometimes I even hum it without realizing. Then I catch myself, and a cold dread washes over me. I rub my arms, and I feel my pulse quicken. Even now, as I sit here thinking about that night I first heard the music, my chest tightens. I can almost hear those notes dancing around in my mind. I notice my breath coming quicker and my heart pounding a bit harder. I wish I had a straightforward answer. I've read stories about objects that hold on to a piece of their past. But I'm not interested in theories or fancy explanations. I just know the box plays a tune when it shouldn't. I can't explain how. It ties back to my grandfather somehow, but I don't know why. Every time I think about it, my stomach twists, and a little spark of fear flares in my chest. I plan to talk to Marcus again soon. Maybe we'll decide to get rid of it together. Or maybe we'll store it somewhere else, out of sight and out of mind. Until then, that strange, familiar melody lingers at the edge of my thoughts. It's like an echo that refuses to die out, reminding me that the box still exists, waiting for another moment to break the silence. And every time I remember that, I feel a slight tremor in my hands and a chill creeping up my spine. I stepped into that building the first night and felt an uneasy twist in my stomach. I saw rows of shelves crammed with dusty boxes and broken equipment. The fluorescent lights overhead gave off a faint buzzing sound. The whole place looked neglected. I was hired to do inventory for a company that bought the old site. No one else wanted to do overnight shifts here. I accepted because I needed the money and the quiet seemed like a bonus. On my first walkthrough, I noticed random stains on the floor and some scrawled graffiti on the walls. A few old desks sat in corners, and the smell of mold lingered in the air. I figured I'd power through, get the job done, and collect my paycheck. On my second night, I realized something felt off. I heard an unexpected thump from the second floor. It sounded like someone dropped a heavy object. I glanced at my watch. It was around 2 a.m. The building was supposed to be locked up. I stood there near a wooden crate filled with old electrical parts and listened for more noise. My heart pounded a bit harder than usual. I didn't hear anything else. I shook it off and returned to sorting tools. For the next hour, I scanned barcodes, wrote notes on my clipboard, and tried to ignore the echo of my own footsteps on the concrete floor. The third night, I heard something that sounded like hurried footsteps above me. I froze near a row of metal racks. My flashlight beam jumped around as I tried to pinpoint the sound. The footsteps moved back and forth. They were quick, and they seemed to stop as soon as I started walking toward the stairs. My arms felt tense. My mouth went dry. I thought maybe some kids had broken in. I switched off my flashlight to hear better. The footsteps faded. I climbed the stairs with slow steps, careful not to make noise. When I reached the second floor corridor, I saw the long hallway with flickering ceiling lights. The paint on the walls was chipped. There were old office doors on each side, most of them locked. I didn't see or hear anyone. I tried a few doors, but they were stuck or jammed. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. After a minute or two, I gave up and went back downstairs. I convinced myself it was the building settling or an animal scurrying around, but it kept happening. Sometimes I'd hear a rush of steps on the floor above me, then absolute silence. Other times I'd be working in one of the smaller storage rooms, and a piece of equipment would drop to the floor in the main area. The clang would echo, making me flinch. I'd rush out to see what fell, but I never found anyone there. Tools would be on the ground even though I'd left them on shelves or tables. I started feeling a constant nervous tension. My shoulders stayed tight. My eyes darted to corners for no reason. I tried to stay focused on my tasks. I tried turning up the volume on my phone's music, but that only made me jump when something else happened outside my field of vision. One early morning, around 3 a.m., I was cataloging some dusty circuit boards near a row of metal filing cabinets. I suddenly felt a strange pressure in my ears. The air felt heavy. I shut the cabinet drawer and heard my name. It was a faint whisper, right behind me. I spun around, dropping my clipboard on the concrete. There was nobody there. I heard a soft, "Michael," like a breath against my ear. My chest went rigid. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the nearest box cutter and shined my flashlight around the cabinets. I checked the aisles. Nothing. The tension in my neck was unbearable. I gathered my stuff and hurried to the break room, which was just a small corner with a table, a chair, and a vending machine. I tried to calm down. I drank some water, then splashed some on my face in the tiny restroom next to the break area. My hands shook. The mirror showed my face looking pale, with small beads of sweat on my forehead. I remember staring at myself, thinking that I might be losing my grip or just letting the late hours mess with me. I went outside for a minute, took a few deep breaths, and scanned the parking lot. It was empty. The street beyond the locked gate was deserted. I went back inside, locked the door again, and forced myself to finish the inventory for that night. Every noise made me jump. I left as soon as the morning shift security guard arrived around 6 a.m. The next few nights were worse. The footsteps got louder. They didn't happen every hour, but they happened enough to keep me on edge. Sometimes they stopped right above me. I stood there listening to that clack, clack, clack overhead, my spine tingling. At times, the corridor lights on the second floor flickered so rapidly that I saw flashes coming through the cracks in the floor. I found myself dreading the moment I'd hear my name again. I started bringing a thermos of coffee and some candy bars to keep me awake. My sense of time felt distorted. I lost track of how long I'd spend in each section because I was always checking around me. One night, a heavy metal tool dropped from a top shelf while I was in the main storage area. It crashed so close to me that I felt the rush of air. My ears rang. My heart pounded so hard I had to grab the edge of a table to steady myself. The tool was big, maybe a large wrench or a crowbar. I looked at the shelf above. Nothing else was near the edge. I knew I hadn't touched that area in at least an hour. I stared at that tool for a long moment, then I kicked it aside and left that section. I stayed in the break room for a good 20 minutes, just sipping coffee and trying to think of anything else. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I began searching for explanations. Maybe squatters were hiding on the second floor. Maybe the building's wiring was faulty, causing the lights to go nuts. I considered the possibility of an intruder with a key, but the security guard, an older guy named Frank, told me the place had been locked up. He said he never saw anyone come or go besides me. He claimed the building had a shady past. The previous tenants apparently ran some sort of backroom operation. Frank didn't know many details. He only said they left a lot of junk behind. He also said a few other employees refused to work late shifts because of strange incidents. He never stayed overnight himself, so he only heard rumors. After a few more nights of hearing things and feeling like someone was watching me, I decided to check every room on the second floor. I wanted to see if there was an access point or any sign of someone camping out. I waited until around midnight, then I climbed the stairs with a firm grip on my flashlight and my phone in my other hand. I started at the far end of the hallway. The first door was unlocked. Inside was an old conference room with a long table and a dozen chairs stacked against a wall. Dust covered everything. A single overhead light flickered. I didn't see footprints or signs of recent activity. The next door was locked. I didn't have the key for it, so I moved on. At the third door, I turned the knob and it opened with a creak. The stench of stale air hit me. I found a small storage room filled with battered filing cabinets. Most were dented or rusted. I opened one drawer and found a stack of folders. The text on them was smeared. Some documents had strange symbols and random strings of numbers. I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like something brushing against the wall. I whipped around, shining my flashlight. The corridor was empty. My breathing grew shallow. My heart hammered in my chest. I hurried out of the storage room and shut the door. I checked a few other offices. They were either empty or piled with cardboard boxes. One room had an overturned chair and a broken lamp on the floor. The lamp's cord was frayed and the glass pieces were scattered around. I noticed my hands were sweating, so I wiped them on my jeans. The final door at the end of the corridor was stuck. I leaned my shoulder into it until it forced open. The room had no lights, so I only had my flashlight beam. The walls had holes, like someone had torn out wiring or maybe hidden stuff behind the drywall. A single desk stood in the corner, missing a drawer. The silence was suffocating. I tried listening for footsteps or any movement. Nothing. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard a soft scraping sound from the far side of the room. It was so faint I wondered if I imagined it. But my skin crawled. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I left the second floor right away. Back on the ground level, I busied myself with inventory again. The sense of being followed lingered. I glanced behind me every few minutes. My mouth felt dry no matter how much water I drank. I checked my phone, hoping for a text message or some distraction, but nobody was around at that hour. The heavy silence of the building pressed in on me. Every little creak made me grip my pen or my flashlight a bit tighter. Around 3:30 a.m., I left the main storage area to move on to the smaller side rooms. The hallway lights were dim. A few bulbs had gone out. As I passed one of the flickering lights, I noticed a cold breeze on my neck. Then I felt a slight tug on my shirt, like a gentle pull. I spun around, arms raised. Nothing was there. My pulse pounded in my temples. The flicker of the light made the hallway look like it was blinking on-off, on-off. I stared at the empty corridor for maybe 10 seconds, waiting for something else to happen. All I heard was my breathing. I forced myself to turn away and keep walking. At 4 a.m., I heard my name again. This time it was louder. Michael. It came from the corner near a stack of pallets. My heart jumped and my stomach clenched. I aimed my flashlight there. I saw the dusty pallets and some old tarps. Nothing else. I backed away, never turning my eyes from that spot. Then I felt my heel bump into something. I almost tripped over another piece of equipment that had fallen. I let out a shaky exhale. I realized my chest was tight and my face felt hot. My mind raced. I wanted to get out of there, but I still had tasks to finish. For the next hour, I rushed through my checklist. I scanned barcodes quickly, sometimes skipping items just so I could be done. I double-checked the clock constantly. My stomach growled, but I had no appetite. My throat was so dry I kept swallowing hard. I sensed that presence around me, even though I never caught sight of an actual person. The footsteps overhead never returned that night, but a few random knocks on the walls startled me. I heard a distant clanging in the pipes once, but I didn't bother investigating. When the security guard arrived at 6 a.m., I felt a wave of relief. I packed my things fast. Frank noticed my anxious expression and asked if everything was okay. I just said I was tired. He gave me a weird look, but he didn't pry. I rushed out to my car, tossed my clipboard on the passenger seat, and started the engine. My hands were trembling. I could still feel the tension in my shoulders and neck. I felt like I had electricity in my veins, even though I was exhausted. I drove home in silence. I didn't even turn on the radio. By the next evening, I considered quitting. But I needed the money, so I forced myself to go back. The routine continued. Each night, something small would happen. Footsteps upstairs, a flickering light, an object falling. Sometimes I caught faint whispers that might have been my name or might have been my imagination. I tried not to panic, but my pulse was always high. I developed a habit of checking every corner before I settled into a new spot. I'd keep my back to the wall whenever I could. Over time, I learned to manage the fear by sticking to a strict system. I worked section by section, kept my music at a low volume so I could still hear if something happened. and took short breaks in the break room to calm my nerves. I never found a direct explanation for the sounds or the falling objects. The footsteps continued for a while. They'd come and go without warning. Sometimes I ran upstairs to catch whoever it was, but the corridor was always empty. I'd find no sign of intruders, no footprints, no open doors. Now I'm close to finishing the entire inventory. I can't wait to be done with this place. The building's new owners plan to remodel soon. Maybe they'll tear down walls and find some old hidden rooms or weird contraptions. I don't know. I don't care. I just want to collect my last paycheck and leave. Working here late at night has been draining. I still feel that sense of unease every time I step inside, like the air is heavier than normal. I sometimes think about that whisper calling my name. The memory makes my skin prickle. I never saw anyone's face. I never caught a clear voice besides that faint sound. But it felt personal, like it was targeting me. I can't explain it. I can only say what happened. Footsteps, falling tools, flickering lights, and a whisper. I haven't told many people about it because I don't want them to think I'm just jumping at shadows. I have one more week of night shifts left. I plan to keep my head down, finish the remaining inventory, and ignore every bump and echo. If something else happens, I'll note it, but I won't investigate. I'll just get out of here when my shift is over. I don't need answers. I just need to be done. That's all there is to it. I came back to my family's place in rural Mexico last month. I didn't expect anyone to talk about a strange rag doll. I heard rumors about it on my first afternoon there. My uncle mentioned it while we were sipping coffee at a small wooden table outside. He said the doll had been showing up in backyards, knocking on windows and creeping people out. I thought it was a prank or a misunderstanding. I felt uneasy, though. It felt like everyone I talked to had a story about this thing. They were all tense. They avoided going outside at night. They closed their windows and doors before sunset. They said the doll sometimes changed shape and tried to scratch people who lingered in the dark. I decided to stay calm about it and not jump to conclusions. I was there to visit my aunt, my uncle, and a few cousins. We don't live close to each other the rest of the year, so I try to make the most of my time with them. They live on a piece of land with a few small houses. There's open fields all around and a large oak tree near the main house. It's an old tree with thick branches, and everyone calls it the Grand Oak. They say it's older than the oldest people in town. On my second night there, I slept in the guest room next to the kitchen. There was a small window behind the bed. That night I woke up around 2 in the morning. I heard a scraping noise. At first I thought it was a branch outside. I sat up, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. There wasn't much light coming in. The moon was out, but it was weak. The scraping sound continued, slow and steady. I realized it wasn't coming from a branch. It sounded more deliberate, like something was moving up and down against the wall outside. I got out of bed. My heartbeat was heavy in my chest. My hands were tense. I took one slow step, then another. My breath felt stuck in my throat. I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe an animal was outside. Maybe it was just a raccoon or something trying to reach food scraps. My uncle had left some tools out there, but that didn't explain the scraping. I reached the window. I pulled the thin curtain aside a bit. I saw a shape. It was small, around 2 feet tall. It looked like a bundle of fabric. It moved slightly, then stopped. I heard a faint scratching. It was right against the window, but I couldn't see the details. I stood frozen. Then it moved again, and I saw a cloth arm lift up. It tapped the window once, a soft tap, like someone knocking very lightly. My stomach felt heavy. I backed away. My breathing got faster. I didn't want to open the window or confront it. I just wanted it to go away. I waited for a few minutes, standing in the dark, pressing my back against the opposite wall. The scraping continued, on and off, for another minute. Then it stopped. The shape vanished from the window. I waited, silent. I listened for footsteps or any other sound. I didn't hear anything. When I thought it was safe, I lay back down. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. My mind kept replaying that dull tap on the glass. The next morning, I went outside as soon as the sun came up. I walked around the side of the house. The ground was soft with dirt and a little damp. I saw odd footprints, maybe from a small shoe or something shaped like a small foot. There were bits of fabric on the ground. They looked torn, dirty, and ragged. I picked one piece up. It felt rough and smelled musty. It reminded me of an old cloth that had been left out for too long. My uncle came out to check on me. He looked at the footprints and the cloth piece. He nodded and said that's what people had been seeing. He said he never saw it that close to the house before. His face showed concern. He told me it usually appeared near fences or behind the barn, not right next to windows. That day, I tried to brush it off. I worked on some chores around the property. I helped my aunt carry groceries from the truck. I helped my uncle fix a broken bench. I tried to focus on normal things. Still, I felt tense. The night before had left me on edge. I found myself glancing at the windows whenever I walked by them. At dinner, I couldn't eat much. I felt my appetite slip away whenever I remembered the quiet tapping. My aunt asked if I was okay. I said yes, but I knew my voice sounded uncertain. That same night, I had a vivid dream. I was standing near the large oak tree. The moon was bright and I could see the thick branches swaying. Then I heard crying. It was soft, like someone sobbing. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. The sound seemed to come from the oak itself, like it was coming from somewhere near the trunk. I tried to step closer, but I felt the ground sink under my feet. The crying grew louder, and I felt a sense of panic. I woke up drenched in sweat. My chest felt tight. It was about 3 a.m. I heard nothing in the house. It was quiet. I felt a dull headache. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I stayed up, listening for any noises outside. I didn't hear the tapping or scratching that night, but the dream left me uneasy. Over the next few days, I heard more stories. My aunt told me that one neighbor saw the doll near his backyard well. Another said it tried to climb through a window during a thunderstorm. No one got hurt, but people said the doll reached at them with twisted fingers. Some folks claimed it had a strange face, like a sewn-on cloth face without features. Others said it had dark button eyes. The stories varied, but the fear was the same. I tried to keep calm, but I started checking the windows and doors every evening. I hated the idea of it creeping around while we slept. One late afternoon, I walked to the oak tree. I wanted to see it up close. The trunk was wide and the bark was rough. I placed my hand on it. I felt the texture against my palm. Then I heard a sound. It was a light rustling from above. I looked up and saw a few leaves flutter down. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I smelled something strange. It was like old fabric, wet and moldy. I looked around the base of the tree. I spotted a piece of cloth jammed between 2 roots. It looked similar to the piece I found near the house, but this one was darker, almost black with dirt. I crouched down. My pulse sped up. I felt that same uneasy twist in my gut. It felt like something had dragged this piece here. I pulled it out. It was damp and reeked. I dropped it and took a step back. I walked back to the house and tried to ignore the smell on my hand. I washed up in the sink, scrubbing with soap until the scent was gone. I didn't mention it to my relatives. I was tired of making them worry. That evening, I told my uncle I wanted to see what happened at night, maybe catch the doll or figure out who was playing a trick. He told me it was a bad idea, but I insisted. We agreed to sit up near the barn, keeping watch for a while. We set up 2 folding chairs and a flashlight. Around midnight, we heard a soft rustle near the fence. We stayed quiet. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. My uncle whispered for me to keep still. We waited. Then we saw a shape move along the fence line. It was small and hunched over. The moonlight was weak, but I caught a glimpse of cloth. It stopped, then seemed to jerk forward in a shaky motion. I heard a scratch against the wooden fence. My uncle gripped the flashlight, but he didn't turn it on yet. We stayed there, crouched behind some crates, watching it. The shape moved along the fence, paused, and then it looked like it was tapping on the boards. It was rhythmic and slow. I felt goosebumps on my arms. My mouth felt dry. My uncle pointed the flashlight, but the moment he turned it on, the shape bolted. It scurried across the yard in a strange way, more like a crawling thing than a person. We stood up and chased after it. We didn't catch it. We lost sight of it near the back of the barn. We found a few more scraps of cloth near the fence. One piece was torn and had a thread that looked like a loose stitch. That was the closest I came to confronting it that night. After that, my uncle and I decided to lock all the windows and doors by dusk. We didn't want to test our luck. Still, the dreams kept coming. I couldn't get rid of the image of that big oak in my sleep. The crying felt real. Sometimes I woke up gasping, my chest tight and my palms sweaty. I never told my family about those dreams. I just tried to get through each day. The tension in the house grew. Everyone felt on edge. My aunt asked me if I thought it was some kind of spirit or old legend. I said I didn't know. I only knew it felt real and threatening. One evening I was alone in the main house because my family had gone to visit a neighbor. I decided to walk outside and sit by the large oak for a few minutes, thinking fresh air might help. I carried a small lantern and a shovel, just in case I needed to scare something away. The night was dark. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The wind was mild, and I heard a few crickets. I approached the tree. I set the lantern on the ground. I stood there listening. My skin prickled. I heard a faint sound, like breathing or wind passing through the leaves. Then I heard the sobbing again, the same sound from my dreams. It was soft and weak. It made my nerves spike. I tightened my grip on the shovel. I scanned the area. The lantern's light only reached a few feet around me. Then I saw movement behind the tree trunk. I stepped closer, my heart hammering. I felt sweat on my forehead. I tried to stay calm, I just wanted to see what it was. I inched around the trunk, shovel raised in my right hand. Suddenly, something small jumped at me. I caught a glimpse of dirty cloth. I swung the shovel out of reflex. I missed. The thing scrambled away, moving on all fours. I heard it hiss. I stepped back, almost stumbling over a root. My arms shook. I tried to steady the lantern with my left hand. The figure stopped a few feet away. It was about 2 feet tall with loose cloth skin. It didn't have a clear face. I saw what looked like a torn mouth or seam. Its arms ended in small points that scraped the ground. My throat felt tight. I stared at it. It let out a scratchy sound like fabric rubbing together. I wanted to back away slowly, but I froze. The thing lunged forward again, aiming for my legs. I jumped sideways and swung the shovel. I struck the ground near it, sending up dirt and rocks. It jerked back, then darted around the side of the tree. I heard the leaves rustle above me. I looked up, but I couldn't see anything in the branches. The sobbing sound faded. My body trembled. My breathing was rapid. I stumbled back toward the house, lantern in one hand, shovel in the other. I felt like my legs weighed a ton. I made it inside, locked the door, and slid down against it. My chest heaved. The door felt solid against my back. My muscles ached from tension. For several minutes I stayed there, listening to my heartbeat. I didn't hear knocking or scratching, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was still outside, lurking near the oak. When my uncle and aunt returned, they found me in the kitchen, clutching a glass of water with shaky hands. I told them what happened. They shared worried looks. My uncle said we should keep all the lights on around the house at night. He said he would talk to some neighbors about setting up patrols. For the rest of my stay, I felt trapped in a cycle of fear and exhaustion. I couldn't sleep without hearing that sobbing in my dreams. I couldn't walk around outside without checking every corner. One night I stayed up with my uncle again near the barn. We didn't see the doll. We only heard distant rustling. It was always out of reach. We didn't know if it was a trick, a possessed object, or something else. We just knew it made life miserable. Even simple tasks felt heavy. I expected it to pop out from behind trees or appear at the windows every time I turned around. On my last night there, I decided to sleep in the living room, away from that window in the guest room. I didn't want another close encounter. The couch was firm, and I had a clear view of the front door. Around midnight, I heard a gentle knock on the window near the door. My chest clenched. I stayed still, trying not to make a sound. The knock came again, 3 soft taps. Then a short pause. Then 2 more taps. I felt a rush of cold sweat run down my back. I stayed silent. I looked around for something to hold as a weapon. I saw a heavy flashlight on the coffee table. I grabbed it and aimed it at the window from where I sat. The tapping stopped. I waited. My heart pounded in my throat. After a moment, I heard slow steps on the front porch. They scraped against the wood. I clenched the flashlight tighter. Then the steps moved away. I didn't check outside. I didn't want to see it face to face. I left early the next day. I told my family I needed to get back to work. They understood. They said they would handle it somehow. I'm still not sure what I witnessed. I can only describe what I saw and heard. I keep having those dreams with the crying near the oak tree. The memory of that small cloth shape won't leave me. I can still recall the musty smell of those fabric scraps. I don't know if the doll is something supernatural or just some twisted creation of someone in the area. All I know is that I felt real fear. I felt my body react. My mouth went dry, my hands shook, and my chest tightened every time I heard those scratches or tapping sounds. Now I'm back home, and I still get flashes of that ragged figure. Sometimes at night I hear faint noises outside my apartment window, and I remember the night I saw the doll at the oak tree. I remember the shape of it, hunched and moving in an unnatural way. I remember the tension in my muscles. I can't say I know why it's there or where it came from. I only know people in that rural area are afraid. They lock their windows before sunset. They jump at small noises in the dark. They whisper about the doll like it's part of everyday life. And whenever I think about going back to visit, I feel a dull dread. I can't forget the tapping on the glass, the musty fabric scraps, and the crying under that tree. I suspect I never will. I still remember the exact moment I lifted that loose piece of wood under the closet floor. My heartbeat kicked up, and my breath felt heavy in my chest. I didn't expect to find anything under there. I was just curious, bored, and tired of unpacking. But I saw a slab of stone with a name I didn't recognize and a date from decades ago. That discovery changed everything for me in that house. I started seeing shadows in my bedroom at night. I'd wake up with a jolt, convinced someone was standing next to me. I didn't want to believe it at first, but it kept happening. The sense that I was never truly alone made it hard to sleep, hard to focus, and hard to stay calm. My father worked in construction all his life. We moved around every time he landed a contract in some new town. I never owned much because I knew I'd just have to stuff it all into boxes again. I was already an adult, but I stuck around for a while, helping him. It was easier than finding my own place and struggling with bills. Plus, I didn't mind traveling. I had gotten used to it. When he found this last job, the place was a small city with old houses and narrow streets. The new house we rented was a single-story building with squeaky floors, a low ceiling, and an odd smell of dust and damp fabric. The landlord mentioned it was built in the 1940s. The living room looked plain with worn-out wooden flooring and a light fixture that flickered sometimes. There was one hallway leading to 2 bedrooms. One of the bedrooms was mine, the other was my father's. A cramped kitchen stood at the end of the hallway. That kitchen had old tiles and a strange echo. My father said the layout was decent, but I noticed the walls were chipped, and the floorboards creaked in specific spots. He didn't mind. He only cared that the rent was cheap. The first day I tried to settle in, I placed my duffel bag on my bed and checked the built-in closet in the corner of the room. The closet was deeper than I expected. The back wall had a couple of nails sticking out, and the bottom had a slight gap near the corner. I pressed on one of the wooden boards because it looked uneven. It made a hollow sound. I let it go that day because I was busy. I went about unloading some clothes and tried to set up my computer. But later that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that there might be something hidden. I was used to older places sometimes having compartments. It wasn't the first time I'd discovered a loose panel or an odd space behind a wall. I waited until my father went to bed. I took a small flashlight from my backpack and quietly approached the closet. I crouched down, slid my hand across the wood, and I felt a slight give. I pushed carefully, and the board lifted. It was a piece of plywood that wasn't nailed down. I felt a knot in my stomach. I pulled it up just enough to fit my arm inside. The gap was about the size of a shoebox. I shone my flashlight in. Inside, I saw something gray and dusty. I reached in, fingers brushing over something solid. I tugged, but it was heavier than I expected. Then I managed to tilt it and slide it out. What I lifted out was a small tombstone, about the size of a hardcover book. It had a name on it. Maybe a man's name, but I couldn't tell if it was a first name or last name. Under the name, it had two dates, one from the 1920s and the other from the 1950s. The stone was rough, with chipped edges. My heart thumped, and my mouth felt dry. I set it on the floor and stared at it. I tried to read the name, but parts of the carving were faded. I could see enough to sense it belonged to someone who'd been alive about 70 years ago. The stone smelled of damp soil and something stale, like it hadn't been moved in a long time. I whispered to myself, "What the hell is this doing in here?" I stood there for a while, shining my flashlight on it. My pulse was racing. I felt a chill run over my arms. I couldn't figure out why someone would store a tombstone under the floor. I decided to put it back. I placed it exactly as I found it, then lowered the board. I told myself I would mention it to my father in the morning, but I didn't say a word when morning came. I wasn't sure how to bring it up. Besides, he was busy getting ready for his new job. He left early, and I just sat at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee staring at the wall. That night, after I turned off the lights, I lay in bed, my eyes half closed. I heard a scrape against the floor. It sounded like a footstep. My eyes snapped open. The hallway was silent. I thought it might be my father walking around, but I listened and I didn't hear any more steps. My room was dark except for the faint glow of a street lamp through the window. I was about to dismiss the noise when I saw movement at the foot of my bed. It was a quick, dark shape, like someone shifting their position. My stomach lurched. My skin tingled. I bolted upright and grabbed my phone. I turned on the phone's flashlight. There was nothing there. I breathed hard, trying to calm myself. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next few days, I kept noticing small, unsettling things. Sometimes I'd hear the floor creak outside my bedroom door late at night. Other times, I felt a breeze from nowhere. My father was always gone early in the morning and returned in the evening, covered in dust and exhausted. He asked me if everything was okay. I just shrugged and said I was still adjusting to the new place. I didn't want to sound paranoid. One afternoon, I decided to inspect the tombstone again. It was bugging me, lingering in my mind. I waited until my father left. Then I went to the closet and pulled up the board. The tombstone was still there. I touched it, felt the roughness of the stone, and read the letters. I couldn't pronounce the name properly, but it looked like a short name. The dates felt strange to me, like they belonged to a life that ended years before I was even born. The stone felt cold and damp against my hand. I set it aside, but this time I stuck my head into the opening, shining the flashlight around. I saw nothing else. Just empty space, dusty corners, and a few cobwebs. I put the tombstone back again. I placed the board over it. I got up, brushed off my hands, and left the house for a while. I walked around the neighborhood, looking for a grocery store or a hardware shop, anything to take my mind off that closet. There was a small market a few blocks away. I bought a soda and stood outside sipping it. The quiet streets and the old houses felt oppressive. I went back home and tried to watch TV, but my mind kept drifting to that hidden stone. My nerves felt on edge. That night I tried to sleep earlier. Around midnight I rolled over and opened my eyes. In the corner of the room, near the closet, I saw a dark shape. It looked like a person crouching. My chest tightened, and my heart pounded so hard I could almost hear it in my ears. I squinted and tried to make sense of the shape. It moved slightly, like it was shifting its weight from one foot to the other. My throat felt tight. I reached for the small lamp on my nightstand and switched it on. The light filled the room and I saw nothing there. I rubbed my eyes and scanned the floor. It was just the bare wooden boards and the closet door, which was closed. I felt a strong rush of adrenaline and I could hardly breathe. Then I lay back down, but I couldn't relax. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. In the morning, I told myself these were just tricks of the mind. Maybe the stress of moving, maybe the stale air in that old place. I tried to remain calm, but my hands shook a bit. My father noticed I looked tired. He asked if I was sick. I said I was fine, just not sleeping well. He left for work again. I went back to the closet, determined to figure out if the tombstone had some clue or something else attached to it. This time, I pulled it out, carried it to my bed, and examined it in the daylight. The stone was a little darker on one side, as if it had been stuck in the ground. I leaned it against the wall. I noticed faint lines below the name, maybe some inscription that had faded almost completely. I ran my fingertips over the engraving, feeling the grooves. I couldn't read anything more. I rested my hand on top of it, and that cold feeling spread through my palm. My neck prickled, like someone was standing behind me, breathing on my skin. I turned around. The room was empty. I decided to show it to my father that evening, no matter how weird it sounded. But when he got home, he was in a bad mood. He complained about the job, said the foreman was screwing up the schedule, and he looked exhausted. He ate a quick dinner and fell asleep on the couch. I didn't want to wake him to talk about it, so I left him alone. I went to bed late. Around 2 a.m., I heard a thud in my room. My eyes popped open. I sat up and looked around. The closet door was open, even though I was sure I'd closed it. I reached for the lamp. When the light came on, I saw the closet door was cracked open a few inches, but not enough for me to see inside. I took a deep breath, stood up, and walked over. My heart hammered. The air felt colder near the closet. I paused, placed my hand on the door, and pushed it open. The inside was dark, just some hangers and a couple of shirts. Then I noticed the floor panel. It looked slightly lifted. I knelt down and pressed on it. It went back into place with a tiny click. My hands were shaking. I stood up and went back to bed. I couldn't close my eyes for a long time, but eventually, exhaustion took over. I woke up in the morning drenched in sweat. The rest of the day I paced around the house, uncertain about what to do. I thought about throwing the tombstone away or taking it outside. But something about messing with a piece of stone with a name and dates on it felt risky. I kept imagining it would bring more problems. I decided to wait until my father came home on the weekend, when he had more time. That Saturday, after breakfast, I told him I needed to show him something. We went into my room. I pulled up the board and revealed the tombstone. He let out a surprised grunt and picked it up. "Why is this here?" he asked. I told him I had no idea. I explained how I found it and that I'd been hearing noises and seeing shadows. He gave me a look like I was losing it. He set the stone aside, knelt down, and stuck his head in the opening. He didn't see anything else. I could see he was uneasy. He didn't like mysteries. He suggested we just leave it in the backyard or toss it in the garbage. He said it was probably left by some previous tenant who collected weird stuff. We took the stone to the backyard. The grass was overgrown, and there was an old shed in the corner. My father set the tombstone next to the shed. He turned to me and said, "Let's leave it here for now. We'll figure out what to do with it later." I nodded, but I felt tense. Part of me wanted it gone, far away from the house. But another part of me worried about disturbing whatever history was attached to it. Still, I didn't want it under my closet anymore. That night, I slept a little better. I didn't see any shadows, and I didn't hear anything strange. I woke up feeling more rested than I had in days. I thought maybe that was the end of it, but the next evening, I was washing dishes in the kitchen when I heard a scraping noise behind me. I shut the faucet off and turned around. The hallway light was on, and I saw a dark shape move from my bedroom into my father's bedroom. It happened in a split second, like someone quickly ducking out of view. My throat went dry. I walked slowly to the hallway, stepping carefully so the floor wouldn't creak. I pushed my father's bedroom door open. The lights were off and the room was empty. My father was still at the store buying groceries, so I knew he wasn't there. The closet doors were closed and the window was shut. I turned on the light. Nothing moved. The air smelled stale like old socks, but that was normal. I checked behind the bed. Nothing. I felt an unsettling weight in my chest. The sense that someone had just been there wouldn't leave me. My father got home a few minutes later. I told him what I saw. He frowned and said, "This place is making you jumpy. Maybe we should break that stone and toss it." I shrugged, not sure if that would help. Eventually, we agreed we'd just throw it out on trash day. We waited a couple of days. The night before trash day, we went to the backyard to get the tombstone. But it wasn't where we left it. I felt a sudden rush of panic. I looked around the shed, behind the tall grass near the fence. Nothing. My father cursed under his breath. We checked all around the yard. It was gone. We went back inside, locked the doors, and sat in the living room. He asked if I had moved it. I told him I didn't. He believed me because he knew I was rattled. We tried to watch some late-night TV to calm down, but my mind was all over the place. That night, I tossed and turned. My father slept in his room with the door locked. I left my light on. Around 2 a.m., my eyelids were heavy, and I was about to drift off when I felt a change in the air. The room got colder. I lifted my head and looked around. The light was dim, but enough to see the walls and furniture. Then near the closet, the shadows seemed to gather again. My heart thudded. I bolted out of bed, yanked the door open, and stepped into the hallway. My breath was shaky. I went into the living room and sat on the couch, refusing to go back in. After about an hour, I nodded off. In the morning, I decided I couldn't stay in that room. I moved my mattress to the living room floor. I didn't want to deal with those shadows anymore. My father thought I was overreacting, but he didn't fight me on it. He seemed worried I was losing my grip, but I just wanted to feel safe. Over the next few days, the nights were calmer. No shadows, no sounds. I didn't go in that bedroom except to grab clothes. My father suggested we start looking for a different place. He didn't see the shadows himself, but he trusted my reactions enough to know it wasn't normal. I said yes. We put in our notice with the landlord. Within 2 weeks, we packed up again. My father found another place a few miles away, a smaller apartment in a newer building. We left the old house. I didn't see the tombstone again, and I didn't want to. For a while, I kept expecting to see something in the corner of my eye at night, but nothing ever appeared. My father's new job continued, and we settled into our new spot. I try not to dwell on what happened in that house. I don't know why there was a tombstone hidden under the closet floor. I don't know what those shadows were. All I know is that I couldn't ignore them, and they felt real enough to rob me of sleep and peace of mind. Maybe I'll never understand it. Part of me is just glad we got out of there before anything worse happened. That's the story. That's why I still get uneasy when I see a loose floorboard or find something left behind in an old house. It reminds me of that small slab of stone, the cold grip of fear, and the sense that something was always standing just behind me, watching. I never believed in curses. I never believed in haunted objects, ghost stories, or anything outside the plain reality of everyday life. But one night, everything changed. I'm going to lay out exactly what happened. I won't dress it up. I won't try to analyze it too deeply. I'll just tell you what I saw, what I felt in my body, and what I did. After you hear this, you can decide if you believe me or not. I honestly don't care anymore. I've got enough problems without trying to convince anyone. It all started on a Saturday evening when I was about to shut down my laptop. I'd been looking up new tires for my car and checking some sports scores, just basic stuff. That's when I got a message from a guy I knew back in high school, a casual acquaintance I'll call Ryan. He sent me a private message with a short note. You have to check out this link. People say the photo is cursed. See if you get freaked out. I laughed to myself because it sounded like a cheap trick. I usually ignore weird links, but Ryan was an okay guy in school, not really the prankster type, so I clicked it. The link took me to an image hosted on some random site. The photo was dark and grainy. It showed a narrow hallway with a figure standing at the far end. The figure looked hazy, almost out of focus, like a smudge on the lens. There was also something on the floor next to the figure, but I couldn't make it out. I let out a quick breath, more annoyed than anything else because I thought it was a dumb scare attempt. I closed the page and shook my head. Then I typed back a quick message to Ryan, something like, "That's creepy, but I don't see anything special. Don't bother sending me this stuff anymore." He never replied. I felt a slight chill on my arms after looking at the photo, but I blamed it on the fact that I was sitting by an open window. I got up, stretched, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. I remember thinking about the shape in that hallway for a moment, but then my eyes started drifting shut. I slept, though not comfortably. I had a few restless dreams about narrow hallways and cold floors, but nothing too disturbing. I woke up at 7 a.m. to the sound of my phone ringing. It was my dad's number, so I picked up right away. His voice sounded tight and strained. He said he'd been feeling dizzy since 5 a.m., and that his left arm was going numb. My stomach nodded. I told him to stay put and dial 911 if he felt like he was about to pass out. I wanted to rush over, so I threw on a pair of jeans, grabbed my keys, and hurried out the door. My dad lives about 20 minutes from my place, so I made the drive as fast as I could. On the way, I kept looking at the clock on my dashboard. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. My heart was beating in my ears. I just wanted to get there. But 5 minutes from his house, my car started shaking. The steering wheel vibrated so badly my arms felt numb. I heard a loud clanking sound under the hood. I yelled at the car, telling it to hold together. Then the engine cut out. No sputtering, no slow decline, just dead. The lights on the dashboard all lit up, and the car drifted to a stop on the side of the road. I'm not a mechanic, but I popped the hood anyway. It smelled like something had burned. I couldn't see any flames or smoke, but everything felt hot to the touch. I remember muttering a bunch of curses under my breath. My phone still had a decent charge, so I called my friend Sam, who lived a few miles away. Sam said he'd come pick me up, but it would take him at least 15 minutes. I had no other choice, so I waited. My mind was on my dad the entire time. I was sweating, not from the heat, but from a mixture of worry and impatience. The back of my neck felt tense and my stomach twisted like I'd eaten something bad. Every few seconds I looked down the road, hoping Sam's car would appear. It felt like an hour, but eventually, I saw his beat-up pickup coming around the bend. I hopped in and told him to drive faster than usual. Sam's a cautious guy, but he pressed on the gas when he heard what was happening. We got to my dad's house, and I rushed inside. He was on the couch, breathing shallowly and holding his left arm close to his chest. He insisted he was okay and just needed to rest, but I could see the sweat pouring down his face. I helped him stand, and Sam joined me in guiding him to my dad's own car, which was parked outside. My dad tried to argue, but I told him not to be stubborn. We took him to the nearest urgent care center. The nurse at the front desk saw my dad's condition and told us to wait while she found someone. She returned with a wheelchair. They took my dad's vitals. His blood pressure was off the charts, and he kept feeling faint. I felt my throat tighten as I watched him. I'd never seen him like that before. In my mind, I kept thinking, just let him be okay. I can't handle this right now. He has to be okay. They admitted him to an exam room and asked me to sit in the waiting area. Sam stayed with me for an hour in that waiting area. I appreciated that. During that time, the events of the morning started clicking in my head. The weird photo, then my dad's sudden problem, then my car breaking down. I told Sam about the image Ryan had sent me, saying how it was supposedly cursed. Sam just shrugged and said it was probably a coincidence. I agreed with him, or at least I wanted to. But I kept rubbing the back of my neck, feeling those goosebumps again. A nurse came out and told me my dad was stable. They wanted to monitor him for the rest of the day. She said he might just be dealing with a severe case of vertigo and possibly something related to stress. Hearing that it wasn't something life-threatening made me exhale for the first time in hours. I felt the tension in my shoulders lessen, and I remember swallowing and realizing how dry my mouth had been. Sam offered to give me a ride back home so I could figure out what to do about my car. My dad was in good hands for now. We left the center and I called a tow truck for my vehicle. The towing company told me they'd pick it up and take it to the local auto shop. I just needed to meet them there and fill out some paperwork. I told Sam to drop me off at the shop. The auto shop looked ordinary enough, a big metal building with a few cars lined up outside. I thanked Sam and told him he could head out. I'd wait for the tow truck on my own. Standing outside that shop, I glanced at my phone. I saw the last message from Ryan was still on my screen. I felt a little jolt in my chest when I saw the word cursed. My logical side told me to ignore it, but a part of me felt uneasy. My body felt tight, like my skin was a size too small. I shut off my phone and stuffed it in my back pocket. After about half an hour, the tow truck pulled up with my car. The driver jumped out, talked with me for a bit, and told me it might be something with the engine belts or the alternator. He wasn't sure, but he promised to have the mechanics check it out first thing Monday morning. He handed me a clipboard with some forms, and I signed them. The smell of oil and old tires made me feel a bit nauseous, probably because I hadn't eaten all day. After that was done, I called a rideshare to get back to my apartment. Once I got home, I felt exhausted and wiped out. My t-shirt clung to my skin, and my legs felt stiff. I went straight to the shower. Under the hot water, I tried to clear my head. I told myself that everything was normal. Cars break down. People get sick. It's all part of life. But I couldn't shake that crawling sensation on my neck. My gut felt weird, like it was trying to tell me something. I stepped out of the shower, got dressed, and considered lying down for a while. Right then, my phone started ringing again. It was my coworker, Dave. He sounded panicked. He said he was at home feeling violently ill. He described waves of nausea and dizziness, similar to what my dad had described. But Dave said it hit him suddenly a couple of hours ago. He lived alone and asked if I could drive him to the same urgent care center I just left. Without even thinking, I grabbed my keys, then realized I didn't have a car. I told Dave about my car breakdown. He sounded miserable, so I suggested he call an ambulance. He said he couldn't afford that, and he kept begging me to help. I felt cornered. Sam wasn't picking up his phone. I had no one else close by. I ran to my computer, requested a rideshare, and headed straight to Dave's place. The driver gave me a look but didn't say much when I told him I'd need help getting someone to the urgent care center. When we arrived at Dave's apartment building, he was waiting outside, hunched over on the front steps. The driver and I helped him stand. Dave's face was gray, and there were sweat droplets on his forehead. He just kept saying he felt like the world was spinning. We got Dave into the car, and I held him upright while the driver navigated through traffic. Dave didn't speak much, just mumbled that his stomach was churning and that his head felt like it was trapped in a vice. I could feel his body trembling next to me. The tension in my own body returned even worse than before. My heart hammered in my chest. My mouth felt dry again. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, but I couldn't shake the fear building up in me. I couldn't help but think, what the hell is going on today? Why is everyone around me getting sick? We arrived at the urgent care center, and I recognized the same nurse from earlier. She gave me a tired look, like she remembered me. We guided Dave inside, and a different nurse led him to an exam room. I sank into one of the plastic chairs in the waiting area and pressed my palms against my eyes. They felt hot and gritty. I had a dull throbbing at the base of my skull. The nurse came out a little while later and said they were running tests on Dave. I asked if there was anything I could do, and she told me to just wait. I sat there, swirling my thoughts around. Everything felt surreal. I told myself it was all just a string of coincidences. People have health problems. Cars can break down. But in the back of my head, I pictured that hallway from the photo, the blurry figure and that shape on the floor. After about an hour, Dave texted me that they were giving him medication for the nausea and hooking him up to an IV. He told me he'd be there for a while. I texted back to see if he wanted me to wait around, but he said I could go. I checked on my dad. He told me he felt a little better, that the doctors were running more tests, but that he might stay overnight just in case. That set me a bit more at ease. At least neither of them was in immediate danger. I called another rideshare to get back home. The sun was setting as we drove. The sky outside the car looked plain, just a bit orange fading into gray. I watched people walking on the sidewalks, cars lined up at red lights, everything looking normal. But I felt anything but normal. My stomach was in knots. My head pulsed with every heartbeat. My fingers tapped against my thigh as if they had a mind of their own. When we pulled up to my apartment building, I thanked the driver. I stumbled upstairs to my place. The second I got inside, I locked the door. Then I sat on my couch, took my phone from my pocket, and stared at it. My face felt hot. My breathing was shaky. I was actually afraid to open that link again. I wanted to message Ryan, ask him more about the photo, but a sharp fear clamped down on my chest. I decided I wasn't going to give it any more of my energy. I set my phone on the coffee table and stared at it, wondering if it could do anything else to me. My stomach growled, so I heated up a frozen dinner. While it cooked in the microwave, I paced around the kitchen, feeling the tile under my feet. My knees felt weak. I kept looking over at my phone. I wondered if that picture was still in my browser's history. I almost wanted to delete everything, but I stopped. I was too wound up to make a decision. The microwave beeped and I tore open the packaging. The smell of cheap pasta sauce filled the kitchen. I forced myself to eat, but every bite felt hard to swallow. For the rest of that evening, I stayed away from my computer. I tried to distract myself with a TV show, but I couldn't focus. I felt my pulse jumping in my wrists. Every shadow in my apartment made me a little uneasy. I kept expecting something to appear in my peripheral vision. At one point, I got up and checked the locks again. I eventually crashed on the couch. My head pounded and my stomach churned a little, but I wasn't truly sick. I was just tense, sweaty, and out of sorts. I drifted in and out of a half-sleep, hearing the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. I jumped up, startled. It was a text from Ryan. "Sorry, man. Didn't think you'd take it so seriously." I stared at his words and my hands started trembling. I wanted to yell at him, to blame him for everything that had happened. But I didn't even know if there was any real connection. All I knew was that before I clicked that link, my life had been normal. Now, within hours, my dad had a sudden health scare. My car died on the road, and a coworker had a severe episode of nausea. I couldn't handle anymore. My hands felt cold, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. I typed back a short reply. "Don't send me that crap again." Then I blocked him. I didn't want to see his name pop up on my phone anymore. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe normally. My heart thudded in my chest, and my arms felt weak. It was like my body was telling me to never look at that picture again. That night I slept for maybe 4 hours, waking up to every little noise in the building. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my neck. I checked my phone. No new messages except a couple from my dad saying he was feeling a bit better. He hoped to go home in a day or so. Dave texted that the doctors gave him fluids and medication, and he was resting at his place. Neither of them knew anything about the photo. Neither of them believed in curses, but I was done testing it. Maybe it was all a coincidence. Maybe I was letting fear get to me. None of that mattered, because in my gut, I felt something was off. I went to my computer that afternoon to clear my browser history. I didn't want a single trace of that image left. I hovered the mouse over the link for a moment, tempted to look at it again, to see if I missed something, but a nauseous feeling washed over me. My hands got sweaty and my pulse quickened. I clicked clear all and slammed the laptop shut. I still don't know if that photo had anything to do with my dad's health scare, or my coworker's crisis, or my car's breakdown. But I haven't looked at it since, and I've got no plans to revisit it. I'd rather move on and leave that link buried in my past. I never got an explanation from Ryan, and I never asked. Sometimes I wonder if things would have played out the same way if I'd just ignored his message. Even now, I get a twinge in my stomach when someone sends me a random image online. I can't help but remember that day. Sometimes I wake up and feel a trickle of dread, afraid that something else bad is going to happen. So far, life has been quiet. My dad recovered. My coworker got back to work after a couple of days. My car needed a new belt and some minor engine repairs, but it's been running fine ever since. I'm relieved, but I'm also cautious. I'm not here to say that photo was cursed for sure. I'm just telling you that I never want to see it again. That's my choice. If anyone ever sends me some so-called haunted image, I'm deleting it on sight. You can call it superstition or paranoia. I just call it common sense. Because if you'd gone through that chain of events in the span of 24 hours, you'd probably feel the same way. And that's all I've got to say about it. I'm done. I noticed something was off as soon as I stepped into that little house. The air felt dense. It was a one-story place on a quiet street, and it looked normal at first. The paint was fine, the windows were intact, and the roof seemed stable. I remember standing by the front door with a couple of boxes in my arms and feeling a tightness in my chest. My wife was behind me, telling me to move so she could come inside. I placed the boxes on the floor and looked around. There was nothing unusual in sight. The living room had a small couch, a table, and a rug that smelled clean. My parents were outside talking to each other as they unloaded more boxes. It was the kind of scene that should have felt calm, but it didn't. I'm not someone who panics without a reason. I've lived in different homes and I know how moving can be stressful, but this was different. I felt my skin prickle. My hands felt a bit unsteady when I brought the next load of boxes inside. I wiped sweat from my forehead and took a deep breath. I told myself it was just exhaustion from the move. I tried to focus on unpacking and arranging things. My wife started placing dishes in the cabinets. My parents put their suitcases in the smaller bedroom. We didn't talk much at first. We were all tired. By the end of the day, we had most of our stuff in place. I decided to order pizza. I sat on the edge of the couch with a slice in my hand, staring at the walls. The walls were plain. No cracks, no stains. The floorboards were old, but they didn't squeak. I went out to the backyard for some air and found a small area with some wild grass. It looked untouched, like nobody had bothered to mow for a while. The sky was clear, and I could see the outline of the roof. Nothing strange. I took a few steps around, listening to the distant hum of cars on the main road about 2 blocks away. Then I went back inside. We all went to bed early. I chose the main bedroom with my wife, and my parents took the smaller one down the hall. The place had only those 2 bedrooms. I remember standing in the doorway before lights out. I looked at the living room one more time. It was dark, and the windows reflected the faint light from the street. I shrugged and went inside the bedroom. I changed into comfortable clothes and lay down. My wife was already drifting off. She breathed slowly, and her face looked relaxed. I was almost asleep when I heard a sound above me. I opened my eyes. The sound had a steady rhythm. It wasn't random. It reminded me of boots on a hardwood floor, but it was on the roof. My heart rate picked up. I kept quiet, trying to figure out if I was just hearing things. Then I heard it again. Thud. 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 Slow steps. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked at the ceiling. It was dark, except for the small circle of light from the lamp. The steps moved across the roof, over the bedroom, then over the hallway, then back. I sat up and tried to breathe calmly. My wife stirred but didn't wake up. I wanted to check outside, but I felt a knot in my stomach. I thought it might be an animal, but the steps were too heavy. After maybe 10 minutes, it stopped. I waited a bit longer, then got up and went to the front door with a flashlight. I stepped outside in my slippers and looked at the roof. I couldn't see anything. No movement, no person, nothing that would cause that sound. The street was silent. There were a few streetlights, but they were weak. The air was cool and my skin felt clammy. I stood there for a minute, then went back in. I locked the door behind me and told myself I'd figure it out in the morning. The next day I woke up feeling tired. My wife was in the kitchen making coffee. She said she heard me get up during the night, asked if everything was okay. I told her about the steps on the roof. She paused and frowned. She said she slept through it, so she wasn't sure. My parents came in for coffee and I mentioned the footsteps. My dad said I was probably hearing the wind. My mom said maybe it was some branches scraping against the roof. But there were no trees near enough to do that. I decided not to push it. We had things to do, like finishing the unpacking and grocery shopping. By lunchtime, we started snapping at each other. My mother complained about the fridge temperature. My father started criticizing the layout of the living room. My wife rolled her eyes at me when I tried to calm them down. I felt my face get hot. My shoulders tensed and I wanted to shout, but I just held it in. We ended up eating in silence. Afterward, I went to the hardware store to get a ladder. I wanted to check the roof myself. I spent an hour on top of that house walking around. The shingles were in decent shape. No signs of damage, no footprints, no dirt patches. There was no obvious entry for an animal. I stood up there squinting at the street. A neighbor walked by but didn't look my way. Everything seemed normal, just boring. Yet I still felt unsettled. That night I decided to stay up later. Everyone else went to bed around 10. I sat in the living room with the lights off. I tried to stay quiet, listening for any noise. At around midnight, I heard those steps again. They started over the bedrooms. Thud, 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 slow and steady. My throat felt dry. I stood and looked out the front window. I couldn't see the roof from that angle. The steps moved again, across the roof toward the living room area. They paused. Then they started up again in the same spot as before. I heard a soft vibration through the ceiling. I felt my skin crawl. My heart was pounding. I flipped on the porch light and rushed outside. The footsteps stopped. I couldn't see anything up there. I walked around the house. My slippers got wet from the dew on the grass. No one was around. I opened the backyard gate. Empty yard, dark corners, no movement. I looked up at the roof again, shining the flashlight around. No reflection of eyes, no silhouette, nothing. The sound was gone. I hardly slept that night. When I drifted off, I had random jolts of anxiety. My wife asked me in the morning why I looked so pale. I told her I had heard the footsteps again. She believed me because I'm not the type to lie about that. My parents seemed annoyed. My mom said maybe it was the pipes. My dad told me I was too jumpy. I felt my jaw clench. I said I'd call a roofer to check for issues. My father shook his head and went outside to tinker with his car. Over the next few days, the same routine repeated. Every night I heard heavy steps on the roof. They started around midnight and lasted for several minutes. Sometimes they came back again around 2 a.m. My parents began arguing more often about small details. My mother complained about how my father never helped with cooking. My father complained about how the plumbing was too loud. My wife and I started snipping at each other too. She said I was too fixated on the roof problem. I told her she was ignoring it. She stormed off a few times. I felt a constant tightness in my chest. One afternoon, a roofer came to check everything. He walked around, knocked on the roof, looked in the attic. He found nothing. No damage, no signs of rodents or other creatures. He said the place was fine. He left, and we still had no explanation. That night, the footsteps came again. They were strong. I could hear them overhead while I lay in bed. I felt sweat trickle down my back. My wife was tense next to me. She pulled the blanket tighter. Neither of us said a word. I listened to the steps until they stopped. Then I fell asleep around 3 a.m. When I woke up, I heard my parents yelling at each other in the kitchen. I rushed in and found them shouting about something trivial, maybe the groceries or the coffee filters. My father banged his fist on the table. My mother threw her hands up. My wife stood by the sink rubbing her temple. She looked at me and said she felt a headache coming on. My father stomped off to the living room. My mother slammed a cabinet. It felt like no one wanted to be in the same room. My pulse was racing and I sensed a slight tremor in my fingers. I hated the feeling. Later that day, my wife pulled me aside. She said she couldn't take the tension anymore. She said she felt like the house was making everyone angry. I agreed. Something about the place felt oppressive. I couldn't see anything wrong, but it was there. My mother and father hardly spoke unless they were complaining. My wife and I were on edge too. That night, the footsteps sounded louder. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway. I looked up at the ceiling. The overhead light was off, so it was dark. The steps moved slowly across the roof, back and forth, back and forth. My heart thumped in my chest. I thought about getting a stick or something to hit the ceiling, but I just stood there. I felt powerless. My breathing was uneven, and I realized my hands were clenched into fists. After several minutes, the footsteps stopped. I didn't hear them again until the next night. A week passed like that. We were all exhausted. One morning, my father said he'd had enough. He wanted to leave. My mother agreed. My wife said she was relieved someone else felt the same. I felt a wave of relief too. We packed our things. We didn't bother to deep clean or fix up the place. We just shoved our stuff into boxes. The atmosphere was heavy the entire time. No one smiled. No one even had the energy to argue anymore. We just wanted out. We left that afternoon. I remember locking the front door and feeling a cold sweat on my forehead. I got in the car with my wife and my parents got into their own car. As we pulled away, I glanced at the roof. Nothing moved. The house looked still and quiet. I felt like something was staring at me from inside, but I didn't see any figure or shape. It was just an uneasy feeling, the same tightness in my chest. I turned back to the road and drove off. A few days later, we settled into another house. It wasn't on the same street. It was in a different neighborhood with more people around. We unpacked our boxes, arranged our furniture, and tried to resume normal life. I noticed a change right away. My parents were calmer. My father even joked about the new house's driveway. My mother laughed about the paint color in the kitchen. My wife looked more relaxed. She didn't snap at me. I felt my own shoulders loosen up. We never figured out what caused those footsteps. We talked about it once or twice, but we didn't have answers. I checked online to see if that old street had any stories attached to it, but I found nothing. My parents refused to discuss it much. My wife just said she was glad we left. We all were. After we moved out, we stopped fighting. We felt normal again. No more restless nights, no more stomping overhead. Sometimes I think about the tension in that house. There was a sense of being watched or judged. I recall how each night those steps circled above us, slow and deliberate. But the moment we stepped outside, there was nothing there. It felt unnatural. Now, when I go to bed, I sometimes wait for that sound. I lie still, expecting a thud on the roof. It never comes. The silence almost feels strange because I got used to that nightly intrusion. But I prefer silence to those footsteps. I prefer the calm. I still have moments when I wonder if anyone else who moved into that house heard the same thing. But I don't make calls or send letters. I'm not curious enough to go back. I don't want that feeling of dread again. I don't want the anger that brewed in us during those weeks. We've been in the new place for a while now. Our routines are steady. My wife and I cook together, watch television, and sit on the porch. My parents visit often. We share meals and talk without snapping at each other. We don't pace around or check the ceiling. I no longer have that tightness in my chest or that prickling sensation on my skin. Sometimes my father and I talk about small repairs. We fix the fence, repaint a wall, normal things. We don't mention the old house. My mother sometimes gets a stiff look on her face when someone brings up the move, but she moves on. None of us want to dwell on it. I feel relief when I walk through our current home. The air feels clearer. I step into each room without that heaviness in my throat. My wife seems happier. She hums to herself when she tidies up. She doesn't glance at the ceiling anymore. My parents are back to their usual routine. My father still grumbles about random stuff, but he doesn't explode. My mother points out little details, but she doesn't snap. It feels normal. It feels right. I don't have nightmares about footsteps, but I do remember them. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I stare at the ceiling. I listen. Silence. No steady thud of heavy boots. Then I relax and drift off again. My wife has a similar reaction. She said she woke up once, convinced she heard something, but it was just our neighbor's cat on the fence outside. She laughed it off and went back to sleep. I've heard stories about strange houses, odd noises, or weird events. I never took them seriously before this, but now I don't dismiss them. I experienced something I can't explain. Maybe it was just some unknown cause, like pipes or weird structural issues. Maybe it was something else. I don't know. I just know that place made us uneasy. It made us angry and tense, and it didn't stop until we left. I'm glad we did. I sometimes drive by that street for other errands, but I don't look for that house. If I see the street sign, I keep going. I feel a little twist in my stomach, and I force myself to focus on the road. I don't want to see if there's a new family there. If there is, I hope they're doing okay. Maybe they don't hear footsteps. Maybe they do. It's none of my business now. We talk about the future a lot these days. My wife wants to travel. My parents are thinking of moving somewhere warmer. I'm not worried about nightmares or hidden noises anymore. I just focus on what's in front of me. Life is better when there's no pounding overhead, no tension in every conversation. I don't need explanations or closure. We got out of there, and we're fine now. That's enough for me. And that's the whole story. We moved into a small house on a calm street. The first night I heard footsteps on the roof. It kept happening every night. The house felt wrong, and we argued over small things. We decided to leave. After that, our lives got back to normal. No more footsteps. No more tension. That's all I can say. I don't have a grand theory or a lesson learned. I only know we're happier away from that house, and I have no desire to step inside it again. I never thought a simple trip to a weekend market in New Orleans would lead me into a mess of strange sounds and unsettling moments. I never imagined I'd lug home a small black doll that would turn my nights into a series of tense, sleepless stretches. But that's exactly what happened when I was a teenager. I bought a cheap protector against envy and brought it back to my house. It was supposed to shield me from jealousy or bad luck. Instead, it turned quiet evenings into weird encounters and left me on edge. Getting rid of it was the best choice I ever made. I remember walking through that open-air market in New Orleans. I was 16 at the time, but I felt like I could handle myself. I had saved enough cash from doing odd jobs, so I was excited to buy souvenirs. I saw different stalls offering handmade crafts, spices, and random trinkets. One particular stall caught my eye because of its display of dolls, amulets, and strange ornaments. The vendor was an older man who barely looked up when I stopped by. He seemed bored, but when I asked about the small black doll, he perked up and gave me a quick explanation. He said it was a protector against envy, and that it was supposed to guard a home from jealous eyes. He didn't tell me much else, but I was intrigued. I liked the look of it. It was about 5 inches tall, stuffed with something dense. It had tiny stitches for eyes and a bit of red thread around its middle. I paid him a few dollars and moved along. At the time, I didn't think about curses or spirits. I just thought the doll looked cool. I tucked it into my backpack and went on my way. A week later, I got back home. I lived in a small suburban area, miles away from anything resembling the energy of New Orleans. My parents never paid much attention to whatever I brought home. They just said, "Put it away in your room." So I placed the doll on my nightstand, near a few random knickknacks I'd collected over the years. The first night I was too tired to notice anything strange. The second night I started hearing faint noises. At first I thought it was just the house settling or the wind passing through, but it sounded like a whisper. I got out of bed and looked around my room. I saw nothing. The doll was there on the nightstand, but I didn't pay attention to it. I just shrugged, told myself I was hearing things, and went back to sleep. Over the following days, I began to notice objects falling off shelves when there was no draft or disturbance. A small clock slipped off a table in the living room when I walked past. No one bumped it, no one touched it. It just fell. I heard that same soft noise at night, sometimes right by my ear. It was never clear words, just a hushed whisper. It raised the hairs on my arms. I'd turn on the light and check the room. I'd try to see if there were cracks in the window letting in weird noises. Nothing seemed out of place. But every time I looked at the nightstand, I caught sight of the doll. I swear there were moments its stitched eyes seemed too dark, like they absorbed the light in a way that didn't make sense. My parents asked me if I was sleeping okay. They noticed I looked tired. I just told them I was feeling restless because of normal teenage stuff. I didn't want to sound crazy by mentioning random whispers. I started waking up around 3 in the morning for no apparent reason. My chest felt tight, and I'd be short of breath. I'd sit up, stare into the darkness, and listen. Sometimes the whispering sound was so close, I could feel a tingling on my neck. I'd get angry and turn on the light, but the noise would stop. Then I'd look at that doll. It was always in the same place, just sitting there. One Saturday, I heard my uncle mention that he felt something touch his arm in the hallway the previous night. He said it felt like someone brushed against him. But when he looked around, no one was there. My aunt told us she heard footsteps in the kitchen when everyone was asleep. She got up and saw the fridge door slightly open, but no one was around. She closed it and went back to bed. She looked a little spooked when she recounted it. I acted like it was no big deal, but I felt uneasy. That night, I stayed in my room, trying to relax. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Around midnight, I heard a clattering sound in the hallway. I rushed out and saw a glass on the floor broken into pieces. I thought maybe it was my uncle again, but nobody was there. My parents were asleep. My aunt and uncle were in the guest room. I cleaned up the pieces, tossing them into the trash can, and then stood in the hallway for a few moments. Everything was silent. My heart was racing, and my palms felt sweaty. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to calm down and go back to my room. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the doll for a long time. It was just a piece of cloth, or so I told myself. But the uneasy feeling in my gut was real. I felt my pulse in my temples. My head ached. I tried to distract myself with music, so I put on headphones. About half an hour later, I got this sudden sensation of cold. I pulled off my headphones and reached for a blanket. That's when I heard a noise, like a soft knock on my door. I opened it. There was no one in the hallway. I looked around, switched on the light, and checked the entire corridor. Empty. I went back and grabbed the doll. I wanted to examine it, see if there was anything inside. It felt hard, like it was stuffed with beans or maybe small stones. I couldn't see any opening. The stitches were tight. My heart started pounding harder, and I got a dull pain in my stomach. I placed the doll back on the nightstand and sat on my bed. I started sweating. My face felt hot and my legs felt weak, as though I'd run a race. I turned off the light and tried to force myself to sleep. I thought maybe it was stress from school or from the trip. But the whispering noises got louder. I swear I heard faint giggles. I kept looking around, convinced I'd see someone. I couldn't see anything. Over the next few days, more stuff happened. My father said he felt a hand tug at his shirt in the living room. He turned around annoyed, expecting me or my mother, but found no one. He told me later that day, and he looked confused. My mother heard a thud in the laundry room. She found a broom on the floor, She said she'd propped it against the wall, but it had ended up across the room. She asked if I was playing a trick. I said I wasn't. I was in my room at the time. The tension in the house was growing. Everyone seemed on edge. People were jumpy, easily startled by small noises. Late one evening, I sat in my room scrolling through my phone, trying not to think about the strange events. Then I got that tight feeling in my chest again. My eyes drifted to the doll. I felt angry. I grabbed it off the nightstand, put it in a cardboard shoebox, and shoved it into the back of my closet. I shut the door. I said to myself, "This is ridiculous. It's just a piece of fabric." But that night, the whispering noises didn't stop. I still heard them. It was as if they were in the walls. My back tingled and I turned on every light in my room. I sat in my chair, arms crossed, trying to keep calm. I felt an urge to get the doll out of the house, but I wasn't sure. Part of me worried I might be overreacting. Another part of me thought it was the only logical step. The next morning, my aunt told me she felt something poke her foot during the night. She told my mother she heard a faint laugh. My mother was now suspicious. She asked if I'd brought anything weird back from my trip. I hesitated, but eventually, I told her about the doll. She asked to see it. I went upstairs to grab the shoebox. When I opened the closet, the box was on its side. The lid was off, and the doll was lying right next to it as if someone had moved it. My stomach twisted. I carefully picked it up and brought it downstairs to show my mother and my aunt. My mother looked at it like it was a piece of garbage. She said, "Throw it out. This doesn't belong in our house." I resisted at first, saying it was just a souvenir, but the look on her face told me she was serious. She left the room without another word. I took the doll back upstairs and sat on my bed with it in my hands. I felt torn. It was just something I'd bought at a market. I didn't understand why it would cause so much trouble, but the voices, the objects falling, the touches, everything started after I brought it home. I couldn't deny that. I felt my heart racing as I stood up. I marched down the stairs, walked outside, and headed to the trash bin by the curb. The sun was setting, and the street was quiet. I lifted the lid, dropped the doll inside, and closed it. My hands shook. My breath was uneven. I felt a wave of relief, though I was still on edge. After I threw the doll away, the house grew quiet. I didn't hear whispers that night. I waited, fully expecting something to rattle or fall, but nothing happened. I slept straight through the night. The next morning, my father seemed relaxed. My aunt didn't complain about any weird touches. My mother looked calm. Nobody mentioned the doll again. I pretended it never existed. We went about our usual routine. Over the next few days, the place felt normal. No unexplained footsteps, no objects shifting, no whispered voices. I kept checking the trash bin, half expecting the doll to reappear, but the collection truck came and took it away. I felt an odd mixture of relief and embarrassment. Part of me wanted to forget it all, but I still replayed every strange noise in my head. I didn't like the feeling of not having an explanation, but I decided I didn't need one. All that mattered was that the weird experiences stopped. My parents never pressed me for details. I think they just felt better once things settled. My uncle asked me once if I believed in curses, and I just said, "I don't know." I didn't want to dig into it. I wanted to move on. I went back to focusing on school, hanging out with friends, and saving up for new gadgets. The memory of those whispers popped up occasionally, especially late at night when the house was silent. But I would remind myself that I threw that little thing away, and that was the end of it. As I got older, I stopped thinking about it. Sometimes, though, I'd remember how real it felt. My heart would race a bit, and I'd get that same tingling on my arms. But the sounds never came back, and nothing else happened after that. It was like it all ended the moment the garbage truck drove off with that shoebox. I'm glad I listened to my gut and tossed it. I don't know what else might have happened if I had kept it. I never bought another weird souvenir. I learned to be cautious with random items, especially ones with labels like "Protector Against Envy." If I see something like that, I just walk away. When people ask me about New Orleans, I talk about the music, the food, and the unique atmosphere. I don't bring up that market booth or the doll. Most of my friends wouldn't believe me anyway, or they'd laugh and say I was imagining things. Sometimes I think about the old man at the stall, the way he looked bored until he noticed me staring at the doll. I wonder if he knew something or if it was just another cheap product. I'm not sure. But every so often, I remember the sound of the whispering right next to my ear. It still makes the hairs on my neck stand up. Looking back, I don't regret visiting that market, but I do regret buying that doll. It caused chaos for a few weeks. The house was tense, and everyone seemed uncomfortable. I never want to go through that again. Some people love collecting odd objects. They display them like trophies. I'm not that person. After all that happened, I realized I don't need a novelty that badly. I'd rather have peace in my own home. I don't like hearing strange voices, and I don't enjoy feeling something tap my shoulder when no one's there. I still don't know what was really going on. I can't prove there was anything supernatural about that doll. I only know my experiences. I know how I felt, and I know the weird stuff that happened in my house. Things got back to normal the second I threw that doll in the trash. I consider that the best solution. I was done with it. My family was done with it. And we all moved on. That's the whole story. There wasn't a grand finale or any dramatic conclusion. I just tossed the doll out and things settled. But I'll always remember those nights, waking up to faint whispering in a room that should have been silent. I'll remember seeing that cardboard box flipped over when I was sure I'd left it securely closed. And I'll always recall the look on my mother's face when she told me to throw that thing away. That's why I don't bring souvenirs home anymore, especially ones that claim to ward off envy. I've had enough surprises for a lifetime. I got the job on a Monday afternoon. The employment agency called me and asked if I was still interested in a private driver position. I said yes right away. They told me the client was a wealthy family who lived in a large house by a lake. The pay was good, and they needed someone to start immediately. I didn't ask many questions. I just wanted the job. I showed up the next morning at their gate, dressed in a clean suit, ready to drive wherever they told me. I had no idea what I was walking into. My first impression of the house was that it looked too big. It had tall windows facing the water, a long driveway, and high stone walls around the property. I saw a gray sky reflected in the lake and felt the cold wind on my face. The front door was huge, made of dark wood, and it opened with a slow creak. A housekeeper greeted me in the foyer. She told me to wait in the main hall until the family was ready. I stood there holding my cap in my hands. I noticed how quiet it was, even though the place was massive. No one walked around, and no voices echoed from the upper floors. I got used to waiting. On most days, I arrived at 8 in the morning, parked in the circular driveway, and went inside to let them know I was ready. Often the family wasn't prepared right away, so I stood in the main hall or by the front staircase. That hall had high ceilings with a chandelier that was never turned on. The floor was polished marble that reflected the overhead lights. Thick rugs were laid around to muffle footsteps. Every sound seemed to vanish as soon as it left my mouth. The first time I noticed something strange was on my second day. I heard a noise upstairs. It sounded like someone running. Quick, heavy steps, then silence. I looked up, expecting to see someone on the balcony or near the railing, but I saw nothing. I thought maybe it was the father rushing around or the mother looking for something. But when they finally came downstairs a few minutes later, they looked calm and composed. They said good morning like nothing had happened. I didn't mention the noise. I figured it was my imagination. I followed them out to the car, drove them into town for some appointments, then brought them back in the late afternoon. That night, I went home tired but still grateful to have steady work. Over the next few days, more odd things happened. The hallway lights near the dining room would flick on, stay bright for a moment, then flick off. Sometimes they'd turn off right as I passed by, causing me to blink in the sudden darkness. Other times, I'd see a light on in the upstairs corridor. Then it would go out on its own. I started watching the switches on the walls to see if someone else was messing with them, but I never saw anyone do it. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I said nothing. I was there to drive, not to ask questions, but I felt uneasy. When I stood in the foyer, I often caught movement from the corner of my eye. I'd glance over and see a shape near a door, but it was never there when I looked straight on. One morning, I thought I saw someone looking at me from the top of the stairs, a small figure near the railing. I blinked, and the shape was gone. After a moment of confusion, I told myself it had to be a trick of the light. On a Wednesday, around 6 in the evening, I was waiting in the foyer again. The family was upstairs getting ready for some event. I heard footsteps above me. They were quick and uneven, like someone pacing back and forth. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, trying to ignore how tense my shoulders felt. The footsteps stopped, then I heard a door open. The sound echoed down the staircase. I didn't see anyone come out. I stepped forward and looked up the stairs. I didn't see a single light on. My stomach felt tight. My skin felt cold. I almost called out to ask if anyone needed help, but my throat went dry. Then I heard a soft thud like a door closing. I took a step back. My heart was beating faster and I felt sweat in my palms. Soon after, the mother came down with a smile on her face. She told me they were ready. I glanced behind her at the second floor. Everything looked quiet and empty. I drove them to their event and tried to keep my mind on the road. A few days later, I got to the house early in the morning. The housekeeper let me in. She seemed kind, but also distant. I asked her if this place was usually so quiet. She shrugged and said the family liked privacy. Then she walked off. Later, while I waited in the foyer, I heard that same rush of footsteps upstairs. I felt a chill in my chest. This time, it clearly sounded like someone running around in circles. I heard a faint tapping, like hands hitting a wall. Then it stopped. I decided to check it out. I climbed the stairs one at a time, careful not to make noise. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions. The lights were off, but there was enough gray daylight seeping through the windows to let me see. I walked down the corridor, listening for any movement. There were several doors on each side, all closed. I tried to keep my breathing steady. My shoes were soft-soled, so they didn't make much sound on the carpet. Halfway down the hall, I saw one door slightly ajar. I thought I heard a faint rustling from inside. My heart pounded. I was worried I'd get in trouble for snooping, but something compelled me to push it open. I looked into a dim room that had a large bed, an ornate dresser, and a tall window overlooking the lake. I stepped inside, scanning the space. Everything was neat. The bed was made with smooth sheets. No one stood behind the dresser. No one hid under the bed. My nerves felt frayed, but I saw no sign of any person. That was when I noticed the door to the adjacent bathroom. It was closed, but I could see a thin line of light under it, even though the rest of the lamps were off. I stood there, my hand shaking a bit as I reached for the doorknob. Then I heard my phone buzz in my pocket. It startled me so much I almost dropped it. I pulled it out and saw a message from the father. They were ready to go and wanted me to bring the car around. I backed out of the room, practically stumbling in my rush. I hurried downstairs, trying not to look like I was spooked. 2 weeks later, the father told me they needed me at the house for an entire weekend. They had family visiting, and they wanted me on call in case anyone needed to be driven around. I arrived on Friday evening. The father showed me to a small room on the ground floor where I could sleep. He wanted me nearby. He paid me extra for my time, so I didn't argue. That night after dinner, I sat in my little room and tried to watch something on my phone. The signal was weak, so I gave up and decided to walk around the house. The father had told me it was okay to use the kitchen if I was hungry. I left my room and walked through a narrow hallway that connected to the main section of the house. The lights were off in that section, so I turned on a small lamp. The hall smelled like old wood and furniture polish. I reached the foyer and saw the large staircase again. The lake outside was dark, with moonlight reflecting off the surface. I heard a creaking noise from above. I froze, my eyes on the top of the stairs. The sound of footsteps started again. It was the same pattern. Fast, uneven steps, then a pause, then more steps. I felt a chill spread across my arms. I looked around for a light switch. I found one on the wall and flipped it. A chandelier overhead flickered to life, lighting the hallway. The footsteps stopped instantly. I stared at the top of the stairs, my pulse thumping. Then I saw a door handle up there move. The handle jerked down like someone was opening the door. I took a step forward. The door opened about an inch, and I saw a faint light inside that room. I waited, barely breathing. The door closed again. It didn't slam, it just shut with a quiet click. I waited for another minute, not sure what to do. Part of me wanted to run up there and yank the door open, but I remembered how that went last time. My stomach knotted up. I left the foyer and headed to the kitchen instead. Inside the kitchen, I turned on every light. I heard the hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of the ceiling lamp. I opened the fridge and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was shaking. I sipped the water, feeling it slide down my dry throat. I put the glass on the counter and leaned against it for a moment. My breath felt shallow, like I couldn't get enough air. I told myself to calm down. I reminded myself there was no reason to panic. This was just a strange house. I'd never seen anything harmful. I was fine. The rest of the night, I stayed in my room. I kept the lights on, and every little sound made me sit up and listen. I heard a few pops and creaks, but nothing as obvious as those footsteps. Around midnight, I finally fell asleep with the lamp on. The next morning, I drove a few of the family's relatives to a tennis club in town. They chatted about real estate, sports cars, and their plans for the evening. No one mentioned anything unusual about the house. They seemed at ease, like they had no idea the place made me so uncomfortable. When we returned, I helped them carry in some shopping bags and golf equipment. Then I waited in the foyer again. While I stood there, I saw the corridor lights flicker in the distance. They turned on and off 3 times. The switches were too far away for me to reach. I knew no one else was in that hallway. I felt my scalp prickle and I rubbed the back of my neck. My heart thumped harder. I felt my breathing get shallow again. The father walked by, noticed me staring at the corridor, and asked if something was wrong. I said no and tried to look normal. That evening I was alone in the foyer again. I was supposed to drive the family to a dinner reservation at 8. I heard the father's voice from upstairs telling everyone to hurry. Then I caught movement at the second floor landing. For a brief moment it looked like someone was there, peering down. My mind registered it as a small shape, maybe around the height of a shorter adult. The shape moved back into the darkness in a flash. It vanished. My heartbeat spiked and I wiped sweat from my temple. The father came down the stairs next, adjusting his cufflinks. He was alone. I swallowed hard and told myself not to lose it. I followed him to the car and opened the door. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. I drove them to dinner and returned to the house to wait. The house was dark when I got back. The staff had the evening off, so I walked in and found all the lamps off. I turned on a small light near the entrance, then went to my room. My head pounded, and my body felt tired. I tried to rest, but I couldn't stop thinking about that shape on the landing. 2 days later, I decided I'd had enough. The father told me they wanted to renew my contract for another month. The money was tempting, but every time I drove onto the property, I felt my chest tighten. I thought about the flickering lights, the footsteps, the occasional figure that never seemed to have a face. I remembered how the house stayed dark, and how the staff walked around quietly, never commenting on anything strange. It felt wrong. I went into the father's study, sat down, and told him I couldn't continue. I said I appreciated the opportunity, but I needed to leave. He frowned, asked if there was a problem, and I just said it wasn't working out for me. He didn't pry. He simply said thank you for my service and told me I was free to go after I dropped them off that afternoon. I drove them to their appointment in silence. My skin felt warmer once I left the estate. When I came back for my final paycheck, I didn't even want to step inside the foyer. I took the envelope from the housekeeper at the door and said goodbye. She gave me a polite nod. I felt a strange sense of relief when I got back in my car. I never talked to the family again. Sometimes I think about that house by the lake. I remember the feeling of cold air in the halls, the sudden flicker of lights, and those footsteps that never made sense. I recall the figure at the top of the stairs. I don't know what it was. I only know I couldn't handle staying there any longer. I left and I haven't looked back. I always hated the sound of that elevator. The first time I heard it groan and rumble through the empty hallways, I felt my stomach tighten. It was late, around 2 in the morning, and I was halfway through my shift. The hospital had been shut down for months except for a small area on the ground floor where we stored emergency supplies. My job was to keep an eye on the place at night, make sure nobody broke in or messed with anything. I worked alone most nights. If something went wrong, I had a radio that connected me to an off-site security company, but they were slow to respond. They always assumed it was just another false alarm. I remember that particular week because it was hot and the air conditioning was turned off throughout the hospital. The only places that felt bearable were the stairwells, since they had windows you could crack open. The rest of the building smelled stale, like old paper and unused cleaning supplies. My footsteps always echoed in a hollow way, especially on the tiled floors. It felt like the walls absorbed every sound. The weird thing about this hospital was that even though the entire place was deactivated, one elevator kept running. Nobody could explain why. The guys who handled the technical shutdown said they cut power to everything except the emergency lighting and a few outlets for our equipment. Yet this elevator, the one near the north corridor, moved on its own schedule. It went up and down whenever it felt like it. I used to joke that the system was glitchy, that maybe some leftover circuit was messing up. But whenever I mentioned it to the day guards or the building manager, they shrugged and said it wasn't a big deal. They told me it was probably just a residual power line left connected somewhere. One night I decided to inspect that elevator more closely. I pressed the call button and watched the floor indicator go from the basement up to the 3rd floor, even though I was on the 1st. It stopped at 3rd, stayed there for a few seconds, then shot down past the basement level. The digital display flickered, then it went blank. I heard a faint whir behind the doors, but they never opened. After maybe 10 seconds, it zoomed back up to the 1st floor and stopped. The doors slid open with a loud hiss, revealing an empty cab with flickering fluorescent lights inside. It smelled like old metal and something else, kind of a rusty odor. My heart pounded a bit, and I told myself I was overreacting. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the 2nd floor, and waited. The doors closed, and I heard a series of clunks as it rose. Then it jumped right past the 2nd floor and kept going. I poked the controls, but nothing happened. The lights inside the cab dimmed and brightened again. I felt a jolt in my knees when it stopped. The indicator said 4, but there were only 3 floors in that hospital. For a second, I thought maybe we had a hidden wing. The building had originally been expanded at some point. The doors didn't open. I felt the car shake a bit. A beep sounded, one of those standard elevator tones, but it came out muffled, like a speaker was broken. I tapped the door open button and nothing happened. The air felt thick. I had this tight sensation in my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly. Then the elevator dropped. It wasn't a free fall. It just moved down too fast, making my stomach flip. The indicator went from 4 to 3 in a blink, and the doors finally opened on the 2nd floor. I almost tripped stepping out. My legs felt wobbly. After that night, I didn't ride that elevator for a while. I stuck to the stairs, even if it meant climbing up and down in the heat. But I still heard it move on its own. Sometimes I'd be doing my usual patrol in the corridor, checking old rooms with leftover desks and chairs, and I'd hear the rattle. I'd see the doors open on some random floor with nobody inside. Once I walked over to look, and I caught a glimpse of the inside lights flickering again. Then the doors slammed shut and it shot away. The building had 4 floors if you counted the rooftop level, but the official layout said it was 3 floors and a locked maintenance area up top. That area was always sealed. The manager told me it was used for storage, but they had moved everything out years ago. They said nobody was allowed up there unless they had a special key. I never tried to push the subject, but it made me curious. I once tried to open the door to that top floor with my own set of keys, but none of them worked. I heard a loud click from behind the door, but it stayed locked. One Friday night, toward the end of my shift, I started hearing loud banging noises from above me. It sounded like metal hitting concrete. I thought maybe someone had broken in, so I radioed the security office. They told me they'd send a patrol car in half an hour. I walked around the second floor trying to locate the source of the noise. I realized it was coming from the elevator shaft. The elevator was moving up and down at random again, banging into something. Then, it stopped. I heard a loud squeak of metal. I followed the sound to the third floor. The corridor there was dark because the overhead lights had burned out. All I could see were faint shapes in the glow from my flashlight. It smelled dusty, and the air felt stale. I walked toward the elevator doors, and I noticed the display said 4 again. That unsettled me because I knew that was the locked floor. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I stepped closer. The doors were closed, but I heard a humming sound. It wasn't the usual motor noise. It was quieter, like something was spinning behind the metal. I pressed the call button. No response. I tried prying the doors open. They wouldn't budge. I felt my pulse beating in my throat. I stepped back and shone my flashlight down the hallway, checking if any of the side rooms were open or if anyone was lurking around. Everything was empty. The hallway smelled old and moldy. Some debris was scattered on the floor, broken tiles and bits of plaster. Suddenly, I heard a small ding like the elevator was about to open. I jumped back. The doors slid apart halfway, then jerked and closed again. Then the display blinked and switched to B for basement. I heard the elevator descend. I felt tension in my shoulders. My radio crackled. The security office told me they were delayed and might not make it until morning. They asked if I wanted to end my shift early, but I couldn't leave until the next guard arrived. That meant I had to spend the rest of the night alone with this nonsense. I kept doing my rounds, trying to ignore the elevator. I walked through the wards on the second floor, checking each door and listening for any more sounds. I made my way back to the main staircase, intending to go down to the ground floor and sit at the security desk for a while. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed a faint light coming from the corridor leading to the locked floor access. My flashlight was on, but this other light looked different, kind of a weak yellow glow. I went toward it. The door to the top floor, the one that was always locked, had a soft light under the frame. I tried the handle. It was still locked. I pressed my ear to it. I heard a buzzing sound like faulty overhead lamps. I also heard a slight scraping noise like something sliding across the floor. My heart thumped. My hands started sweating. I glanced around, trying to find a reason for that light. All the power should have been cut off up there except for the emergency fixtures. I double-checked the main fuse boxes earlier in the month. There wasn't supposed to be any working light on that floor. I felt a chill roll down my spine, even though it was hot in the building. The hallway felt empty. My flashlight shone on cracked tiles and old signage on the walls. I heard the elevators rumble somewhere far below me. I decided to test my keys again, even though I knew none of them opened that door. I tried every single one. The lock didn't turn. I pressed my shoulder against the door, but it was solid. I stood there for a minute, just listening. My breathing sounded too loud. My mouth felt dry. Then the elevator's metal clank echoed from behind me. I spun around and saw the elevator at the other end of the hallway. The display read 3, but the doors were open, and the cab looked dark inside. I felt a compulsion to look inside again, like maybe I'd missed something before. I walked slowly over to it, shining my flashlight into the cab. The overhead light in the elevator was flickering again, casting quick shadows along the walls. The control panel was lit up, but none of the floor buttons were pressed. I stepped inside carefully, making sure the door didn't shut behind me. I pushed every button, testing them. The door close button worked, but then the doors bounced back open. The elevator didn't move. At that moment, I heard a faint voice, or maybe it was just a mechanical hiss. I couldn't tell. It came from somewhere above the elevator ceiling, like in the shaft. I looked up at the little hatch overhead. It was closed. My chest tightened again and I felt a rush of panic. I started pressing the ground floor button over and over. Nothing happened. Then, without warning, the doors slid shut and the car jerked up. The lights inside flashed. My stomach twisted, my ears popped. I watched the indicator jump straight from 3 to 4. The elevator stopped with a hard thud. The doors wouldn't open. My mind raced. I grabbed the emergency phone. It gave me a dead tone. I tried the radio on my belt. Only static came through. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. My heartbeat pounded in my temples. I started hitting the door with my flashlight. I shouted that I was stuck, just in case someone, somewhere could hear me. I kicked the doors. They didn't move. The lights in the elevator flickered in a slow pattern. I felt like the air was getting stale. Then, something clicked. The doors opened. I raised my flashlight. I was looking at a hallway that I'd never seen before. The walls were yellowish. A few ceiling lights worked, but they were dim. The floor looked scuffed, like it had been used recently. I smelled something like disinfectant. My heart hammered, but I stepped out. I felt a draft on my face. The hallway stretched left and right. Both ends were dark. This shouldn't have been possible. The top floor was supposed to be locked up tight with no lights. But there I was, standing in front of a corridor that seemed active. I took a few steps forward, shining my flashlight around. There were closed doors on each side of the hallway. Some had peeling labels. One door said, Storage A. Another said, Maintenance Office. I heard a faint buzzing from behind one of them, like a fluorescent lamp. My eyes stung from the old chemical smell in the air. The temperature felt colder up there. My teeth almost started chattering. I forced myself to walk, but my legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to move. I tried the first door. It was locked. The second one opened a couple inches, but something blocked it from the inside. I pushed it, and it scraped across the floor. I flashed the light in. I saw shelves against the walls and some boxes on the floor. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for a small space by the door where the floor looked clean, like someone had been standing there recently. My heart thumped even harder. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. I decided to head back to the elevator. The entire scene felt wrong and I needed to get out. But when I turned around, the elevator doors were closed. The panel above it was dark. I walked over and pressed the call button. Nothing happened. The elevator seemed dead. I slammed my fist on the doors. I heard the echo travel down the shaft. Then, out of nowhere, a loud clang sounded behind me. I spun around, pointing my flashlight. One of the doors at the far end of the hallway had opened. It squeaked on rusty hinges. I couldn't see inside, but I saw movement. It looked like a shadow crossing the doorway. My breath caught in my throat. My legs tensed. My mind screamed at me to run. I stepped back, pressing the elevator button again, even though I knew it did nothing. The shadow in the doorway moved again. Then the door slammed shut. The hallway went silent. I felt my pulse banging in my head. My hands shook so much that the flashlight beam trembled. I pressed the elevator button one last time, and to my shock, the doors opened. Inside, the elevator lights were bright again, like nothing was wrong. I jumped in, smashed the ground floor button, and the doors shut. The elevator dropped quickly, but not as violently as before. The indicator read 3, then 2, then 1, then B, skipping everything in between. My stomach flipped. Finally, it stopped at the first floor. The doors opened onto the same dark corridor I'd known all those nights. I ran out and used the stairs to get to the ground floor. I didn't even glance back. I made it to the security desk, gulping for air. My uniform was soaked with sweat. I grabbed the phone, called the security company, and told them I was done for the night. I said if they wanted me back, they'd have to send someone else with me. I wasn't staying alone anymore. When the morning guard showed up, I told him what happened. He just stared at me. He said he'd never gotten that elevator to go to any floor above the 3rd. I handed him the keys, got in my car, and left. I still think about that locked floor. I remember the hallways, the dust, and that sudden draft of cold air. I remember the shadow and the moment it froze my chest. I haven't gone back and I don't intend to. That night convinced me there are some doors that should stay locked, especially in empty hospitals where nothing's supposed to be alive. I don't know what was up there. I'm fine not knowing. All I care about is that I got out in one piece. I moved into that old place because the rent was so low it felt like a prank. I had checked a dozen apartments that month and every landlord wanted more money than I could spare. Then I found this 100-year-old house on a real estate site. The ad showed a dark, weathered exterior and dusty windows. It mentioned a massive yard, thick walls, and a surprising amount of space. I expected the price to be out of reach, but the monthly rent was cheaper than any studio in the city. It made no sense. I drove out to meet the owner the same day I saw the ad. He seemed rushed. He just handed me the key, gave me a quick walkthrough, and left with a brief goodbye. I didn't think too hard about it. I needed a place. And this was a dream deal on paper. I'm a practical person. I don't obsess over stories or rumors. When I signed the lease, I only worried about fixing a few broken door hinges and maybe scrubbing some grimy floors. The first day, I brought my stuff in an old pickup truck. The house smelled stale, like a closet that no one opens. The floors creaked in most rooms, and the paint on the walls peeled in a few spots. I spent the afternoon carrying boxes inside. Then I set up my bed and dropped onto it. I remember feeling both relieved and uneasy. The place was huge for one person. The ceilings felt high, and the hallways seemed too long. I told myself I'd get used to it. On the second day, I tried to open a few windows to let fresh air in. Some windows were stuck like they hadn't been moved in decades. I used a flathead screwdriver to pry them loose. Dust drifted out, and I coughed for a while. By the evening, I had all the windows propped open. A cool breeze moved through the house, and I felt a little better about everything. I found a small table in the kitchen, left behind by the previous tenants. It was sturdy enough, so I decided to keep it. I didn't have much furniture anyway. Over the next few days, I started to explore all the nooks and crannies. There were 2 floors. The top floor had 3 rooms. One was a sort of small sitting area with a stained armchair. Another was completely empty except for an old trunk. The trunk was locked. I rattled it a bit, but the lock wouldn't budge. The third room was a narrow space with a tiny window overlooking the backyard. It was damp and smelled like mold. I decided not to store anything there. The backyard was bigger than I expected. It had patches of grass, a few random stones, and a couple of trees with twisted branches. In one corner stood a wooden shed. The door was missing, and the roof looked like it could collapse at any moment. Inside the shed, there were some rusty tools and an old wheelbarrow. Nothing seemed valuable. I made a mental note to clean it up if I had time. Maybe I could use the shed for extra storage. During the first week, I started noticing odd things at night. The floorboards groaned even when I was still. Sometimes I heard a quick thump in the hallway while I was reading in my room. I'd jump up to check, and there would be nothing. I told myself it was an old house settling. Pipes and wood can make noises. It was probably normal. Still, I felt my chest tighten every time I heard a new sound. The hair on my arms would stand up. I'd walk around with my phone's flashlight, checking each corner. I never found anything out of place, but I stayed on edge. One evening, I was heading to the kitchen to grab water. As I passed the living room, I saw a figure by the far wall. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. He wore dark trousers and a jacket with a strange cut, like something you might see in old photographs from the 1920s. He was standing there, facing me. At first, I froze. My legs felt heavy. My heart slammed in my chest. I could barely swallow. The man smiled, which made me step back. I didn't hear him speak. I just saw his face and his eyes. Then I blinked, and he was gone. I stood there panting. My hands shook, and I felt sweat on my forehead. My mind spun. I wondered if I was half asleep or if the dim light was playing tricks on me. I walked around the living room, flicked all the lights on, and checked every corner. No one was there. I felt a chill in my stomach. The next day I asked two neighbors if they knew anything about the house. One older man stared at me, then asked if I had seen something strange. I told him I thought I saw someone inside. He said I wasn't the first person to mention that. According to him, a previous resident left in a hurry after claiming they saw a person in old-fashioned clothes walking around. The neighbor also said that a man who lived there decades ago had vanished. He didn't know the details, only that the man's belongings were still inside the house when the authorities arrived. It was never resolved. No one found any official record of where he went. He just disappeared. The neighbor shrugged and said the house had a reputation for scaring people off. I forced a laugh and tried to sound casual, but my stomach felt tight. I kept that in my head as I went back home. I told myself I didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural. I tried to stay busy. I hung some pictures. I bought a few rugs at a discount store. I added a bright lamp to the living room. Every time I saw that corner where I spotted the man, I felt uneasy. My breath would catch. I avoided looking directly at that spot. Eventually, I just kept a small lamp on all the time, so it was never dark in that area. About a week later, I decided to clear out the backyard more thoroughly. The grass was taller than I realized, and the earth felt lumpy in places. I borrowed a shovel from a friend. As I was digging near the shed, I hit something solid. I got on my knees, brushed the dirt away, and found what looked like small bones. They weren't large enough for a cow or anything big, but they were too big for something like a rodent. I took a closer look. My mouth went dry. I felt an uncomfortable jolt in my chest. They looked oddly shaped. I couldn't tell what animal they belonged to. The bones had a yellowish-brown color, and some fragments looked broken. I scanned the area for more. I found a few more pieces nearby. My hands trembled as I collected them. I didn't want to leave them there. It felt wrong. I wrapped the bones in an old cloth and put them in a shoebox. I wasn't sure what to do next. My mind raced with possible explanations. Maybe an old pet was buried here. Maybe it was something else. The smell of damp dirt clung to me. I started to feel a headache coming on. It was late in the afternoon, and I didn't want to look at those bones anymore. I placed the shoebox in the shed on a crate and left. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept picturing the weird shapes of those bones. I heard noises in the hallway around midnight, a soft shuffle, like footsteps dragging across the floor. I stayed under the covers, my heart pounding. My mind replayed that moment in the living room. I remembered the figure's smile and felt a queasy sensation in my stomach. After a while, I forced myself to stand up. I turned on all the lights and walked from room to room, checking. My hand felt clammy on the doorknobs. My breathing was shallow. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't relax. The next day, I told another neighbor about the bones. He suggested taking them to a local vet, or maybe the police, to check if it was an animal. I decided to handle it quietly. I drove to a small veterinary clinic on the edge of town. The vet looked at them for a minute, but he said he wasn't an expert on old skeletal remains. He guessed it might be a small dog or something similar. He looked uncomfortable, like he didn't want to get involved. He just told me I could bury them in a proper place or contact animal control. I felt uneasy carrying those bones around. I found a local pet cemetery that accepted remains for burial. I paid a small fee and they took the box. I told them I didn't know what type of animal it was, and they said they would handle it respectfully. As I left, I felt a slight sense of relief, like I had done the right thing. My heart still pounded as I drove home, though. My mind kept looping back to that figure in the living room. After I got rid of the bones, I noticed the house felt quieter. The floor still creaked, but I didn't hear as many strange thumps or scraping sounds. The nights were still uncomfortable, but I slept a bit better. Sometimes I thought about the man who vanished decades ago. I wondered if those bones had any connection to him, but I tried not to dwell on it. The neighbor said there was never any record of a crime or anything. The man just left and didn't return. No one had proof he died. For all I knew, he moved away without telling anyone. One afternoon, I decided to open that locked trunk upstairs. I had a small crowbar in my toolbox. The lock was rusty. I wedged the crowbar under the metal clasp and pushed. It snapped open with a loud crack. Inside, I found old newspapers, a cracked mirror, and a couple of folded jackets. They looked old-fashioned, maybe from the 1930s or 40s. The newspapers didn't have any big headlines. One article mentioned a local fair. Another talked about storms. I didn't see anything about a disappearance or anything else unusual. I pulled out the jackets. They smelled musty. I tossed them aside, not wanting to keep them. Underneath, I found a notebook with a few pages torn out. The remaining pages had scribbled notes about gardening and some sketches of plants. Nothing about a person leaving or something sinister. It felt underwhelming. The sense of relief I had after burying the bones didn't last forever. On some nights, especially when the wind picked up, I felt that same tension in my chest. The hallway lights would flicker sometimes. The old wiring, I assumed. Every so often, I thought I saw a quick movement in my peripheral vision, like someone crossing from one room to another. When I turned my head, there was nothing. My body would tense up. I'd feel my lungs tighten. I'd grip my phone or flick on a flashlight. The house always looked empty. I tried to invite a couple of friends over for a small get-together, hoping that more people in the house would break the weird spell. We grilled some burgers in the backyard. I kept glancing at the spot where I had dug up the bones. It was just dirt and grass now. The shed was still half falling apart, but I didn't mention anything to my friends about what I found. They didn't comment on anything strange, although one friend joked about the place looking haunted. I shrugged it off. At least for a few hours I felt normal. We ate, drank some beer, and stayed outside until dusk. After they left, I locked all the doors and windows. The silence inside the house felt heavier than before. Since then, I haven't seen the man in the corridor or anywhere else. I still think about him. I can't explain the sight of that figure and the old-fashioned clothes. It wasn't a reflection or a shadow. I saw his face clearly. That smile sticks in my mind. Sometimes I wonder if the bones I found released some kind of energy when I removed them. I'm not a superstitious person, but the difference in the house's atmosphere is hard to ignore. It's been a while now, and I live here quietly. The rent is still low. My landlord rarely contacts me. The neighbors wave when they see me, but they don't bring up the house anymore. I keep the place as clean as I can. I've repaired a few things. I never found any more strange objects or remains in the yard, though I haven't dug much since then. The trunk upstairs is empty now except for that mirror and the old newspapers. I keep my clothes in my own suitcase. For some reason, I don't want to store anything in that trunk. When I'm home at night, I still get a weird feeling in my stomach from time to time. It's like a subtle warning. I walk through the rooms with cautious steps, especially after dark. The floor creaks, the wind rattles the windows, and I sometimes pause to listen. My heart rate goes up. I tell myself it's just an old house. It's just the plumbing or the wood. But I can't shake the memory of that figure's eyes or the way he looked right at me. It's not the kind of thing you brush off easily. Sometimes I consider moving out, but the rent is too good, and I've settled into a routine. I have a job nearby, and commuting is easy from here. I can afford groceries, utilities, and still save a little. The practical side of me says I should stay. But every once in a while, I wake up at night, covered in sweat, feeling like someone's watching me. I sit up, turn on the lamp, and stare at the doorway. My pulse pounds in my temples. I wait, ears straining, expecting a footstep or a whisper. It never comes. Eventually I calm down, lie back down, and drift off. I haven't mentioned any of this to my family. They know I live in a cheap old house, but they don't ask many questions. I figure most people wouldn't understand. They'd tell me to leave if I'm uncomfortable. But I'm not in danger. At least I don't think so. It's just a heavy, tense atmosphere that flares up once in a while. It's like the house is holding on to its secrets, and I'm just another temporary occupant passing through. I try to keep my life simple. I work, buy groceries, watch TV, sleep. The house is still standing, even if it groans and shifts like a living thing. I haven't seen that man again, and I haven't found any new hidden items. But the memory stays vivid. The cheap rent brought me here, and I can't pretend it's just a normal place. I carry that tension in my shoulders and chest, especially at night. Still, it's my home now, and I've learned to live with the unease. I don't have a neat ending to this story. I'm still here. I still glance around corners carefully. My nerves still jolt at sudden noises, but the house is quieter. The bones are gone, buried somewhere in that pet cemetery. No one seems to know more about the missing man from decades ago. Maybe he's still out there. Maybe he just walked away from this place and never looked back. Whatever happened, he left an echo behind. I felt it. Maybe I still do. But for now, it's just me here, trying to ignore the chill in the air and hold on to the fact that the rent is paid and the doors are locked. And that's enough to keep going. I'll never forget the night everything changed in my house. Before that, I thought stories about ghosts and apparitions were silly. I figured people were either tired, stressed, or making things up. Then I experienced something I couldn't explain. It made me question everything I believed about what might lurk behind closed doors. My fiancée, Laura, had been seeing a woman in a brown dress around our house. She mentioned it a few times, and each time I shrugged it off. She said the woman lingered in corners and near doorways, always watching but never coming too close. I assumed Laura was under stress. She was working long hours, and I thought maybe she was half dreaming or catching glimpses of shadows. I told her to get more rest, maybe take some time off from work. She agreed to try that, but the sightings didn't stop. She insisted this figure seemed too real to be an illusion. One evening, I was cleaning out the pantry to make space for some new shelves. The house was quiet. Laura had gone out for groceries, so I was alone. I moved boxes and swept the floor. Then I reached a dusty corner where I found a small wooden box. It had an old clasp on the front. The box looked fragile, so I opened it carefully. Inside, there were 2 black and white photographs. I squinted at them under the dim pantry light. They showed a woman standing on a porch wearing a dark dress that looked brown in the older photo's coloring. The style reminded me of something from the 1940s or 1950s. I had never seen these photos or this person before. I felt a slight chill, but I told myself it was the draft coming from the small gap near the back door. As soon as Laura came home, I showed her the pictures. She stared at them in silence, and her eyes got wide. She turned pale. She pointed at the dress. "That's the outfit," she said, her voice trembling. I could see she was serious. I asked if she recognized the woman's face, and she said no. The only thing that matched was the dress. I tried to stay calm. Maybe the dress was a common style, and it was all coincidence. Still, something made my skin crawl. I decided to set the photos aside in the spare room on top of an old desk. Laura didn't object. She just looked relieved that they weren't in our main living space. That night, I tossed and turned in bed. It felt like the air was heavier than usual. Laura was asleep, but I couldn't settle my mind. Around 2:00 a.m., I heard a soft creaking noise. I sat up and listened. Another creak. It sounded like a hinge, maybe from a door in the hallway. I got out of bed quietly so I wouldn't wake Laura. I walked to the hallway and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place, but the temperature felt cooler. The wooden floor under my feet was colder than normal. My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale slowly, then walked toward the spare room. I paused at the door. My ears caught a faint click, like a doorknob turning on its own. I reached for the light switch. The overhead light came on, revealing the room just as I'd left it. The photos were still on the desk. I glanced around for any sign of movement, but saw nothing. My shoulders tensed as I scanned every corner. The air smelled stale, like an attic. I waited another minute, then told myself it was my imagination. I turned off the light and headed back to bed. As I walked away, the door behind me creaked again. My muscles tightened, but I kept moving. I didn't want to show fear in my own house. About an hour later, I heard a sharp bang. It sounded like a door slamming hard. Laura woke up with a jolt and clutched my arm. "Did you hear that?" she asked. I nodded. We both got up. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet because I thought maybe someone had broken in. We checked each room one by one. The living room was empty, the kitchen was clear, and nothing was missing. The front and back doors were locked. When we finally got to the spare room, we found the door open. It had definitely been closed before. I reached in and flicked on the light. The photos were lying on the floor near the desk. They looked like they had been tossed there. I felt a tightness in my chest and the hair on my arm stood up. My throat went dry and I swallowed hard. I leaned down and picked up the photos. I noticed the glass on the old frame had a crack. The frame must have been in the wooden box, and when it fell, it broke. But I couldn't remember seeing a frame in that box earlier, just the pictures themselves. I thought maybe I missed it. Still, the whole scene bothered me. Nothing else in the room was out of place, just those photos. I decided to put them in a drawer for the night. I locked the drawer. Laura was shaking slightly. I rubbed her shoulder and tried to sound confident. "We're just tired," I said. "We'll figure this out tomorrow." I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. My mind kept replaying those noises and the image of the photos on the floor. At sunrise, I got up and checked the spare room again. The door was shut, and everything was quiet. I unlocked the drawer. The photos were in the same spot, but the cracked frame was gone. My stomach turned and I felt a surge of panic. I whispered to myself that I must have moved the frame somewhere else and forgot about it. I searched the room. Nothing. I looked in the closet and even behind the desk. The frame was nowhere. When Laura came in, I told her what happened. She looked uncomfortable but stayed calm. She put a hand on my arm and said, "I think we need to get rid of them." She meant the photographs. I hesitated because I still believed there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe these photos belonged to a previous owner of the house. The noises could have been from old wood floors and a draft. The missing frame could have been stuck behind something. I tried to rationalize, but I couldn't deny how unnerved I felt. My chest felt tight, and I had this buzzing in my ears that wouldn't go away. I told Laura we'd at least move the photos out of the house for now. I wanted to see if that would change anything. I didn't plan on throwing them away right away, but I needed to see if the disturbances would stop. So I grabbed an old envelope, placed the photos inside, and took them out to the garage. I placed them in a wooden cabinet near the back. Then I locked the cabinet. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in days, I felt a bit of relief. Laura seemed calmer too. She suggested we get some fresh air and maybe go for a walk. We spent a couple of hours away from the house. When we returned, the atmosphere felt different. The air was lighter. There was no strange chill, and we heard no creaking or banging. That evening, for the first time all week, we slept peacefully. The next day went by without any incidents. I started to think that maybe the worst had passed. I was still confused about the photographs, but I decided not to question the calm. I focused on regular chores. I fixed a broken table leg, took out the trash, and even cooked dinner. Everything felt normal for 2 days. On the third day, I had a strange urge to check on the envelope in the garage. I don't know why I felt that way. I just wanted to see if the photos were still there. When I opened the cabinet, the envelope was in the same place, but it felt heavier. I peered inside and saw the 2 photos plus another small piece of paper. It looked like a receipt or a note, but the handwriting was faint. I squinted at it under the garage light. It listed some items: flour, sugar, coffee, and a date in the corner, June 14th, 1952. A wave of dread washed over me. I wasn't sure how that paper got there. I hadn't noticed it before. The words looked smudged and the paper smelled musty. I showed it to Laura. She rubbed her temples, looking worried. "Maybe you missed it before," she said, but neither of us sounded convinced. I slid the note back into the envelope and sealed it. I told her I wanted these things out of our possession completely. She nodded. We decided to drive to a nearby storage facility and rent a small unit. It felt ridiculous, but I didn't want to throw the photos in the trash. I thought maybe they belonged to some family out there and I felt guilty just discarding them. So we paid for a small locker and I placed the envelope inside. I locked it up and left. For the rest of that evening, I felt a tension lifting from my shoulders. I exhaled more easily, like I hadn't even realized I was holding in so much stress. We made dinner together, and the house felt normal again. No strange sounds, no cold spots, no door creaks. When we went to bed, I fell asleep immediately and slept through the night. Over the next week, nothing happened. No sightings, no noises. Laura looked healthier, and I felt more relaxed. After that calm week, I got curious again. I couldn't help it. I wanted answers about the woman in the photos. I figured if I understood who she was, I could rationalize what was going on. So I took a day off work, and I visited the local historical society. I brought a scanned copy of the photos on my phone. I had scanned them before putting them in storage. The librarian on duty helped me look through old records, newspapers, and property documents. We found a mention of a woman with a similar dress style in a 1950s photograph from a local event. The name listed under a group photo was Marjorie Davis, but the faces were too blurry to confirm if it was the same person. The librarian said old newspapers might have personal ads or announcements. We checked, but nothing matched exactly. After a few hours, I gave up. I was tired and felt a sense of unease creeping in. I didn't want to dig any deeper. It was wearing me down. When I got back home, Laura was in the living room watching TV. She looked up and asked if I found anything. I told her no. She shrugged and said, maybe we should let it go. I agreed. We had put the photos in storage, and life seemed to be returning to normal. We decided to stop investigating. We both went to bed feeling content. I can't say I fully understood what happened or why, but ever since we took those photographs out of our house, the strange noises vanished. No more doors opened on their own, and no more cabinets slammed in the middle of the night. Laura stopped mentioning that woman in the brown dress. Our home felt familiar and safe again. I don't have a perfect explanation, but I know what I saw and heard. It was real to me in a physical way. The sounds, the cold drafts, the door slams. I could feel the tension in my muscles. I could sense the heaviness in the air. It wasn't just our imaginations. Something was tied to those photographs. Once they were gone, everything quieted down. Sometimes I think about grabbing them from the storage locker and trying to find the family they belong to. But then I remember those nights of disturbed sleep and that feeling of dread. For now, I'll let them stay where they are. My house is peaceful, and I don't want to risk upsetting that balance. I still wonder who that woman was and why she appeared in our home, but I'm not pushing for answers. I'm comfortable letting this be one of those things that remains unsolved. I live my life as usual now. I go to work, come home, make dinner, watch a little TV, and sleep without interruption. Every once in a while, though, when I pass by the spare room, I pause. I think about that night when the door slammed and how I felt a chill right down to my bones. Then I remember it's over. I keep walking. I'm glad things are back to normal. And that's how I want them to stay. I'm not a superstitious guy, but I have to tell you about this bizarre thing that happened to me last fall. It started with a simple impulse. I saw a strange doll at a flea market and decided to buy it. I can't explain exactly why. It was ugly and it looked worn, but there was something about it that grabbed my attention. I remember walking past tables full of random junk, old plates, dusty vases, rusty tools, and then my eyes locked on this doll sitting in a cardboard box. Its face was chipped, and it had these glassy eyes that pointed slightly in different directions. I felt uneasy when I looked at it, but I still dug into my pocket and gave the seller $2. It was a weird moment. I shrugged it off and thought I'd just put it on a shelf at home as a conversation piece. I had no idea what I was bringing into my life. When I got home, I placed the doll on top of a small dresser in my spare room. That room was pretty empty except for a rolled-up yoga mat, a single chair, and some old books. I figured the doll could stay there. I didn't want to look at it all the time, and the spare room was rarely used. The first couple of days I almost forgot about it. I'd pass by the spare room on my way to the bathroom or to retrieve something from the closet, and sometimes I'd glance at the doll. Nothing special happened at first. It was just there, leaning slightly to one side because its base wasn't even. Its paint was peeling off in places, and it had a faint smell of dust and mildew. I thought about wiping it down, but I never got around to it. Around the third day, I started feeling odd whenever I stepped into that spare room. The moment I crossed the threshold, I'd get a slight headache. It wasn't unbearable, just a dull ache at my temples. But it seemed to happen only in that room. I'd leave, walk into the hallway, and the headache would ease up. I tried to ignore it. I told myself the room was stuffy, or maybe I needed more water. But as the days passed, the headaches got worse. They turned into this throbbing pain that pulsed across my forehead. It only happened in the spare room, and I found myself avoiding going in there unless it was absolutely necessary. I also started feeling a tightness in my chest whenever I stood near the doll. It felt like I was anxious for no reason. My heart would pound and my palms would get sweaty. I'd step out of the room and I'd feel normal again. One night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. I heard a soft tapping sound, like a light knock against wood. My bedroom is next to the spare room, so I assumed maybe a window was loose or a tree branch was hitting the wall. I got up, slipped on some sweatpants, and walked into the hallway. The tapping stopped the second I approached the spare room door. I peeked inside. Everything was in place. The chair was still. The yoga mat was in the corner, and the doll was on the dresser. I walked up to the window. It was closed tight. No branches were near it. I shrugged and went back to bed, feeling a strange tension in my shoulders. My mind drifted to the doll, but I tried to push that thought away. I turned on some music at a low volume and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I stepped into the spare room to open the window. The air felt heavy, like it was thick and stale. The moment I got closer to the doll, a jolt of pain shot through my head. It was sudden and sharp, causing me to stagger. My eyes watered, and I had to steady myself against the dresser. Then I heard a faint scraping noise. It sounded like something sliding across wood. I looked around and couldn't see anything moving. I tilted my head, trying to figure out the source of that scraping sound, but it went silent. I glanced at the doll, and its left arm looked like it was at a slightly different angle than before. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had bumped the dresser. I decided to move the doll to the closet, thinking maybe it was just creeping me out in that corner. When I picked it up, I noticed how cold and rough the surface felt. The face paint had a dull shine, and there was a thin crack running along its neck. It gave me the chills. I placed it inside a shoebox on the top shelf of the closet, closed the door, and left the room. That evening, I felt uneasy again. I was sitting in my living room trying to watch a movie, but I kept thinking about the doll. I kept imagining those big glassy eyes under the closet door, like they were staring at me through the walls. I felt silly. It was just a piece of painted wood or plastic or whatever it was made of. But the sensation wouldn't go away. Around 10, I decided to try going to bed. I got under the covers and switched off the lamp. For a while, everything was quiet. Then I heard a rustling sound coming from the spare room. It wasn't tapping this time. It sounded like cloth or paper being crumpled. My heart started pounding again. I felt a knot in my stomach. I told myself it could be the wind outside or a piece of paper that fell from a shelf. But the noise continued in a rhythmic way, like something shifting back and forth. I forced myself out of bed and walked down the hallway. My mouth felt dry, and my legs felt weak. I opened the spare room door and flicked the light switch. The closet door was still shut, but the rustling sound was louder, like it was coming from inside the closet. My skin prickled and a cold sweat formed on my forehead. I can't deny I was scared. I stared at the closet, waiting to see if it would stop on its own. It didn't. I stepped forward, reached out, and gripped the closet handle. My hand was shaking. I swung the door open and the noise stopped. The shoebox was on its side like it had been knocked over. The doll was half out of it, leaning against the inside wall of the closet. One of its arms was bent inward, and it seemed angled in a way I hadn't left it. I knew I was alone in the apartment, so I couldn't explain how that box got tipped. I put the doll back inside the box, closed it, and shut the closet door. I backed out of the room, turned off the light, and went straight to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I felt my heart racing for a while, and sleep didn't come easily. The next few days, I tried to act like everything was normal. I went to work, ran errands, and spent as little time as possible near the spare room. But I could feel that tension in the air whenever I passed that closed door. My head would start to pound, and I'd catch myself breathing faster. On the 5th night after I first heard the tapping, I woke up abruptly at around 3 in the morning. My room was dark except for the dim glow of the streetlight outside. I sat up, wiped my face, and listened. I heard a quiet whispering sound. It was so soft I had to strain my ears to be sure. It sounded like low muttering, like someone was talking under their breath. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it against my ribs. The sound was coming from the spare room's direction. I didn't want to go in there. My instincts told me to stay put, but the whispering got a little louder and I couldn't ignore it. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, and walked slowly down the hallway. Every step felt heavier. When I reached the spare room door, I stood there listening through the wood. The whispering continued, but I couldn't make out any words. I pushed the door open and the noise stopped immediately. The room was dark, but a little light from the hallway spilled in. I reached over and turned on the ceiling light. The closet door was shut. The chair was where I left it. The doll was in the closet, in its shoebox, or so I assumed. I felt a surge of fear, like cold water running down my back. Then I realized my head was starting to hurt again. My temples were pounding, and a wave of nausea hit me. I backed out of the room and shut the door. I went straight to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and stood there gripping the edge of the sink. I was wide awake and sweating. I felt like I was losing it. That morning, I decided enough was enough. I waited until the sun was up, then marched into the spare room. I opened the closet, grabbed the doll, and stared at it. The left side of its face was chipped, revealing a bit of grayish material beneath the paint. Its eyes seemed to focus on me in a strange way. My headache flared up again, and I felt dizzy. I carried the doll into the living room, set it on the floor, and looked around for something heavy. I found a small hammer in my toolbox. I knelt down, took a deep breath, and smashed the doll's face. It made a dull cracking sound. The material split, and I saw bits of paint and dust fly up. My hands were trembling, and my heart was racing. I hit it a few more times, making sure it was destroyed. Pieces of it scattered on the floor, and a musty smell filled the air. The whole time, I felt a weird pressure in my chest, like something was resisting me. But I kept going until it was unrecognizable. I gathered the fragments into a plastic bag. I tied it up tight, marched outside, and threw it in the dumpster behind my building. I wiped my forehead and felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was like I could breathe properly for the first time in a week. My headache faded in minutes. I walked back into my apartment, half expecting the spare room to feel the same, but it didn't. The air felt normal. I went inside the closet. The space looked dull and empty, but there was no feeling of heaviness. I opened the window in the spare room and let the sunlight in. I spent the next hour vacuuming the floor and wiping down the dresser, trying to remove any trace of that thing. I didn't want to see even a single shard of it left behind. For the rest of the day, I felt lighter. My neck and shoulders were still a bit tense, but the constant pounding in my head was gone. I watched some TV, made myself dinner, and slept through the night without any interruptions. No more whispering, no more tapping, no more scraping. The next morning, I woke up feeling fresh. The sun was shining through my bedroom window, and I got up without that familiar knot of fear in my stomach. I walked into the spare room just to confirm it was really over. It looked plain and ordinary. A folded chair, a rolled yoga mat, some boxes in the closet, and no doll anywhere. I stayed there for a good 10 minutes. waiting to see if the headache or the tightness in my chest would come back. Nothing happened. I guess I don't have a neat explanation for what caused those sounds or the feelings I had. I only know that once I destroyed that creepy doll, I returned to normal. I haven't had any strange noises in the middle of the night since then. No more headaches that come out of nowhere. Nothing has moved on its own or whispered in the dark. I never told the neighbors or my coworkers the full story. I just said I had a weird experience with a secondhand item and decided to throw it out. They gave me funny looks, but I didn't care. I knew what I felt, and I stand by my choice. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had just ignored the problem. The idea of that thing staying in my home, whispering and moving around, freaks me out. I'm just glad it's gone. That's pretty much it. I bought a creepy doll. Weird stuff happened, and it all stopped after I smashed it and tossed it in the trash. I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone. I'm just sharing what I went through. If I ever see another doll like that, I'm going to walk the other way as fast as I can. Maybe there was something messed up about the materials or something that carried a strange energy. I don't know. All I know is that I had to get rid of it. Now my place feels like my own again. And that's the story. I'll be direct. I never believed in odd coincidences or hidden forces until a week ago. That's when I brought home a porcelain ballerina doll my grandfather left me. My grandfather had been a serious collector of porcelain figures all his life, and I always thought they were a bit creepy. But I never thought I'd have experiences like the ones I'm about to describe. I'm still not entirely sure what happened, but I know I don't want that doll in my life anymore. My grandfather passed away last year. When his attorney reached out to settle some of the estate details, I wasn't expecting to get anything beyond a small memento. Instead, I was told he'd left me one specific porcelain doll. It was a ballerina with delicate features, arms raised like she was in mid-pirouette, and a stiff tulle skirt that felt strange to the touch. I remember seeing it in his house when I was younger, but I'd never paid much attention to it. So when I got the call, I wasn't thrilled. Still, I felt obliged to accept it. A part of me thought it might be worth something, especially considering his entire collection was appraised at a high value. I drove to the lawyer's office on a Tuesday. The doll was in a padded box wrapped in layers of thick paper. I felt a weird chill when I opened it. Her painted eyes were too lifelike, and something about her face set me on edge. I brushed it off as my own nerves. I brought the doll home and placed it on a shelf in my living room. I didn't think much more about it. That first night was quiet. I went to bed without any problems. The next day, I was working from home. I do freelance design, so I spend a lot of time at my desk, which sits just a few feet from the living room. Sometime around noon, I heard a sudden bang from the next room. It sounded like my front door slammed shut. I got up and walked over, but the door was locked and closed tight. I checked the windows, thinking a draft might have blown something. Nothing was open. I looked around, shrugged it off, and went back to work. That evening, my nephew came over to help me troubleshoot my computer. He's in his 20s, so he's not a kid, but I still call him my nephew. While he was tinkering with some software, I went to the kitchen to grab us drinks. I heard him say, "Hey, did you just walk down the hallway?" I called back, "No, I've been in here." He walked over to the kitchen doorway, looked puzzled, and said, "I swear I heard footsteps." We both checked around. The apartment is small, and there's nowhere for anyone to hide. We found nothing. He shrugged it off, but he looked uneasy. I felt it too. My heart was pounding a bit, like I was bracing for something. But again, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. That night, I had my first nightmare. It wasn't anything elaborate. I just remember feeling trapped in some dark, narrow space. I woke up sweating, my chest tight, and I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. I got up to get water and spotted the doll on the shelf. The streetlight from outside lit up half of her face, and it almost looked like she was staring right at me. I felt a tightness in my stomach. I told myself it was silly, just an overactive imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. On Thursday, I had to leave for a few errands. When I got back, my apartment felt stuffy. I went to open a window. Just as I reached for the latch, I heard another door slam. This time, I was certain I closed all the doors before leaving. I dashed to the living room and saw that the closet door, which I'm sure was closed, was now wide open. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding. Then the door wobbled and slammed itself shut right in front of me. There was no draft in the room. There was no wind. I didn't see any reason for that door to move on its own. My hands felt clammy. I stood there trying to keep my breathing steady, and I decided to check inside the closet. Nothing was out of place. Nothing fell off the shelves. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. After that, I started feeling uneasy around the doll. I didn't want to touch it or move it, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more I felt it was watching me. I tried focusing on my work, but every so often I'd catch myself glancing at it. I'd feel my heart rate spike for a moment. I'd hear the faintest sound, like a gentle scrape or a soft click, and I'd look at the doll, wondering if it had shifted. Of course, it looked the same as always, but I couldn't relax. By Friday, my nightmares were getting worse. I was waking up 2 or 3 times a night, gasping for air, sometimes convinced I'd heard somebody whispering my name. I'd jump out of bed and check the rooms. Nothing was there. My body felt tense all day. I was losing focus on my projects, and I could barely keep my eyes open in the afternoon. Every time I dozed off, I'd jolt awake, thinking I heard a door slam or the faint sound of porcelain tapping on a hard surface. That evening, I invited a friend over. I didn't mention the doll at first. I just said I was feeling cooped up. We sat in the living room talking about normal stuff, work, weekend plans, that sort of thing. But then, while I was in mid-sentence, the hallway door slammed shut. My friend froze. We both stared at each other. I tried to make light of it. I said, "It's probably just a loose hinge." I knew it wasn't. My friend looked at me, concerned. He said, "You need to check that out." So we both went to the hallway, turned on the lights, and looked at the door. The hinges seemed fine. No windows were open. No air vents were blowing. My friend shifted uncomfortably, then looked over my shoulder into the living room and said, "Is that doll new?" I told him the story about my grandfather. He listened without saying much, but I could see a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. It wasn't a normal reaction. It felt like he too sensed something was off. After he left, I decided to sleep on the couch. I just didn't want to be alone in my bedroom where the nightmares always hit me hardest. I fell asleep watching TV, but at around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something sliding. It was a slow, scraping noise. I jumped off the couch and turned on every light I could. The doll was still on the shelf, but I thought it looked tilted, like it had shifted slightly. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. I tried to calm down by focusing on the mundane details, the color of the walls, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, anything to ground myself. Eventually, I convinced myself I was just hearing things in my sleep. I sat there, but I couldn't stop staring at that doll. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling drained and on edge. I had no appetite. My mind was fixated on the doll and the weird activity in my apartment. I decided to see if there was some rational explanation. I checked the building's ventilation. I closed and opened the doors a few times to see if they'd slam on their own. Nothing recreated the effect. I tested the closet door. It stayed put. Then I felt stupid, standing there with my pulse racing, as if I was doing a ghost hunt. But the stress was too much. By noon, I was having small panic attacks every time I walked past that shelf. By late afternoon, I made a choice. I needed that thing out of my